and welcome back. My name is Ben, aka Downsize It, and this is my first video of my brand new tutorial and tactics series. Before going any further, I would like to say don't watch this video from start to finish. That would be an exercise in madness, and that is not the intent of this video. The intent is for you to use the description below here in YouTube, where I have listed out all of the timestamps of the chapters and some of the important sub-chapters, so you can quickly and easily click on the timestamp and reference what it is you want to watch and what rules you want to learn about. Full disclosure, this kind of reads like a bad 80s instructional video, PSA video, and I will endeavor in the future to try to make my instructional videos a bit more entertaining and not as stiff in one note, so to speak. In the meantime, however, if there are any rules discrepancies that you discover while watching this video, and I might have made an error, even though I have endeavored my best to make sure all errors are accounted for, whether in special video cuts or with descriptions in the video itself as it comes up, please let me know in the comments below. And I'm going to have a pinned post at the top of the comments section that will constantly be updated where there are potential egregious rules errors or misunderstandings that need clarified, and I will have the timestamp where it happens. If you see that happen, please comment with the timestamp so I can put that in the pinned post at the bottom. When all else fails, utilize the Living Rules reference. That is the Bible of Armada. Sometimes it can be a bit confusing, but it breaks down all the situations you might run into and has lots of errata near the bottom to reference special circumstances. And of course, also go to the Star Wars Armada Facebook page that is run by Krabak. There we have quite a bit of discussion when there are rules clarifications needed or there is misunderstandings. And if I find that there are particular rules that I have gotten wrong or need to be clarified better, I'll create addendum or retraction videos in the future to go in this series to fix the errors I have made in this video. So, without further ado, this is the introduction to Star Wars Armada, and I hope you find it useful. First, let's discuss the foundational concepts of the game Star Wars Armada. The base of the game is planning your moves with command dials many times, several turns in advance, and then shooting first, then moving. This is unique when it comes to miniature wargaming. Other games in Armada's genre, like X-Wing and Legion, or outside of that, like Warhammer 40k, Battletech, other board games, you move first and then you shoot. And it is critical to understand with Armada to rewire it in your brain that with Armada, you shoot first, then you move. And this is something that can take quite a while getting used to and takes practice for you to see its effects on the table as you plan your turns and your moves in advance. So for example, the CR-90 in this Victory class Star Destroyer. The Victory would like to take a shot at the CR-90. Now standard thinking, if you've come from other games, would be, well, I get to move, get into range, and then shoot. And if that's what you were planning on previously, you wouldn't be able to do that because once you measured your range, you would notice that you were outside the longest range possible to be able to take the shot. And therefore, there is no shot. So if you would have planned here a concentrate fire dial ready to really lay down the hurt on this Rebel Corvette, that would be a wasted dial because you didn't have your ranges judged correctly, because you have to shoot first and then move. Next, let's talk about game size and play area. Standard games of Armada consist of building a fleet up to 400 points and playing on a 6x3 game area. What is shown here is a 3x3 game area, which I would recommend for starting off, and only building fleets from 200 to 300 points. And I would recommend playing several 200 to 300 point games before you decide to upgrade to the 400 point games on a larger standard game size of the 6x3. And you don't have to have a game mat. You can just mark off an area and play on a kitchen table or on the floor or wherever you would like. But game mats do make it easier so you can see the borders of your gameplay area. And that is also important because if you fly your ship off the board, that ship is considered out of the game. These components are your maneuver tool and your range ruler, and on the other side, your distance ruler. On the ruler, you have ranges for shooting your weapons. You have close range, which is for all 3 weapons of red, blue, and black. Medium range, which is for red and blue, and then long range, which is for red dice only. On the maneuver tool, this is how you maneuver your ships around the board. You have speed 1, speed 2, speed 3, and speed 4. And as you maneuver, you adjust by clicks at different sections to set up how you're going to do your moves. And the details of that I will be discussing in the movement section. On the flip side of the range ruler is distance markers. This is for measuring what's called distance, as well as determining the range of your squadrons, the fighters in the game, how far they can move. Distance 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Distance 1 is important because that determines engagement range for squadrons, as well as the distance squadrons need to be at to shoot at each other and other ships. And that will be covered in greater detail in the squadrons section. These are your command dials and your speed dial. The command dials are used for issuing commands to your ship, and you plan them during the command phase and use them during the ship phase. I'll discuss this in greater detail in the command section, what each command does. And the other dial here is how you determine what speed your ships are moving at. And the number on your speed dial corresponds to how far you move on the maneuver tool. So for example, speed 2, you would then go from 0 to 2 on when you're moving your ship. And I will discuss that obviously in greater detail in the movement section. These are the tokens you'll be using in Star Wars Armada, a selection of them. The tokens on the right hand of your screen will not be discussed in this video. Those are for more advanced play and specialty cards. I just wanted to give you a preview of those, and they'll be discussed in future videos. On the left side of the screen are tokens that you will probably see in most every game you play. We have pass tokens. These are used for marking off deployment areas and for marking ships temporarily. These are your defense tokens. These are for marking your flagships on each respective side. And you have number tokens for marking duplicate ships you might have on the board, so you can tell the difference. These are tokens that go along with commands. This is the victory token, double-sided for Imperial or Rebel. And these are objective tokens that will be used in missions. One token I realized I forgot to include because I don't have it anymore, and that is the turn token. I'll just be showing a graphic here instead as an example. You have a blue side and a red side. In turn 1, you always start on the blue side, and when you move to turn 2, you flip it to the red side. And you'll use corresponding turn markers. They're the round tokens also shown in a graphic here of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And the colors help you determine squadron activations, and then you just move your turn token and place it next to each turn number to indicate which turn number it is. These are the dice that you're going to be using for rolling damage in Armada. From left to right, we have the red dice, which represents long-range shots, blue dice for medium-range shots, and black dice for short-range shots. The symbols on the dice represent different types of outcomes. You have hits, which are these symbols here, accuracies, which are these symbols here, critical effects, and maybe I can get a better shot of a critical effect like so. You also have blanks on certain sides, and as you can see with the red dice and the black dice, some dice have double hits or hit crit options for more damage. While dealing damage, you take a card for each damage suffered on the hull of your ship, and if it's a critical effect, you take the first damage face up. More specifics on the types of critical effects and damage on ships and shields, etc. will be covered later in this video. These are the obstacles you'll be using in the game. The obstacles on the left are ones that you will be using in almost every game of Armada you play. The ones on the right are for more advanced play and specialty missions, and the specifics of those will be covered in a later video. On the left side we have the station, which can heal ships and squadrons. We have a debris field that, if landed on by a ship, causes 2 damage, which you can select anywhere on your ship to take. And asteroid fields, if you land on it with a ship, you take a face-up damage card, similar to a critical effect. More details on what it means to overlap and land on these will be covered in the movement section. These are examples of some of the ship cards you'll be using in the game of Armada, and I'm going to go over the details of these ship cards and how to read them. First off, on the bottom here, you'll notice these symbols. These represent the different types of upgrade cards that can be attached to a ship when you're building your fleet. And on the right is how many points the ship is worth when you're building the fleet. Now moving on to the rest of how to read the card, you have the name of the ship at the top. This number here represents how many hit points the ship has. Basically, how many damage cards it can take before the ship is destroyed. This is considered your anti-squadron armament. This is how the number of dice that you roll when you're flakking out of a hull zone to attack squadrons. These are the defense dice that your ship comes with and can use to defend itself. This represents the different speeds and maneuverability of your ship. Speeds 1, 2, 3, and 4, and the different maneuverability profiles at the different speeds. I'll be covering those in greater detail in the movement section. This part of the card shows you how many dice you roll depending on which side of the ship you are shooting out of. So for example, if you're shooting out of the front of the CR-90 Corvette, you get 2 red dice and a blue dice. However, if you're shooting out the back, you only get 1 red dice. This also represents how many shields you have on each side. So for example, the CR-98 Corvette has 2 shields on the front, starboard, and port sides, and 1 shield on the aft. By contrast, a larger ship, the Victory II class Star Destroyer, gets 3 shields on the forward and sides and 1 on the back. And then lastly, this section determines the command value, squadron value, and engineering value of your ships. I'll be covering what those mean in greater detail in the command section and the squadron section. These are some examples of upgrade cards that you can use to attach to a ship. On the left here we have General Dodonna, which is a rebel commander. And this is important to note that every fleet you build must have a commander, and you can only have 1 commander. And you will notice that this upgrade card, the commander card, has no symbol in the bottom left corner. That is because commanders don't have a specific upgrade symbol. Any ship can take a commander except for a flotilla. And flotillas are the GR-75 for the rebels and the Gesandte for the Imperials. For the other 2 cards, we have Leia Organa, and you'll notice on the bottom left, she has this symbol here. This is the officer upgrade slot, and since the CR-90 has an officer upgrade slot available, she can be attached to the CR-90 Corvette. Another example is XX-9 turbo lasers. Again, notice the symbol on the left, and then the symbol on the Corvette, meaning that the Corvette can take a turbo laser upgrade. I also want to point out that some cards are considered unique. If a card has a dot next to the name, it means that is a unique card and you can only have one type of that card in your fleet. These are some examples of Squadron Cards. They are similar to ship cards in that they give all the information you need for operating your squadrons. For example, on this X-Wing squadron, we have the movement. And that number corresponds with the distance on the distance side of your measuring tool. And with squadrons, you can choose to go less speed or no speed at all when you are moving. So you can go up to the speed indicated here on the card. This number determines how many hits they can take before the squadron is destroyed. This is their anti-squadron armament, so X-Wings get to roll 4 blue dice against other squadrons. And this is the anti-ship battery armament. This is how many dice it gets to roll when attacking ships. You'll notice on these cards they also have special rules and specific keywords listed here. We will not be discussing those in this video. That will be for a later video for more advanced squadron play. One other thing to point out as looking at these, Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader are unique squadrons, and notice how they have the dot next to their name pointing out that they are unique. In addition, they are also considered aces. Aces also get defense tokens assigned to them, making them more survivable, similar to ships. And real quick, you can only have a number of aces in your fleet equal to every 100 points of your fleet size. I'll discuss that more in detail when we discuss building fleets. And lastly, these are some examples of mission cards. When you are creating a fleet, you have to pick one of each type of mission: red missions, yellow missions, and blue missions. The mission text tells you special rules for setup and for scoring and for planning, etc. And some missions in the bottom right have a number. When receiving victory tokens, your victory tokens are worth whatever the number is in the bottom right of the mission you are playing. Now this is an example of a ship that you will be using in Armada, and I'm going to go over how to read the ship card while it's played on the board. So as you're looking at your ship, and let me remove this so you can actually see easier what I'm talking about. This ship card represents the capabilities of your ship while you're playing the game. These green lines, and for rebels they'll be red lines, are your firing arcs for all 4 sides of your ship. You have your 4, port or left side, starboard or right side, or aft, the rear side. These represent your battery armaments, how many dice you roll depending on the range you're at. So for example, at long range, this victory would get 3 red dice, and at medium range you would get 3 red dice and 3 blue dice. So it has a powerful forward arc. However, it has a less powerful rear arc, only 2 red dice. Here also represents another indication of how many hull points, how many damage cards it can take. This represents its squadron value, so whenever it is flacking out a side, shooting at squadrons, that's the dice you roll. And these numbers represent what you set your shield dials to. So whatever number this is corresponds to the number that you start your shields at. And when taking damage, you just adjust the shields like so, or as you repair shield damage, like so. This is the front of the ship, so whenever you're putting your ships together, and this is what you use to maneuver your ship on the maneuver tool, and I'll be discussing that in greater detail in the maneuver section. Also, one last thing, these yellow dots are used for determining line of sight when shooting at other ships or squadrons. I'll be discussing the specifics of all that in the combat section of this video. I would like to go over some additional details when it comes to the physical components of your ships and squadrons, specifically when it comes to measuring and determining distances, overlapping, etc. You will notice on your physical components of your ship here, you have the cardboard piece that comes out whenever you're building it. You have the plastic base. You have the plastic extensions for the shield dial. and you have the shield dial itself. When you are measuring something, you always measure cardboard to cardboard. And what that means, for example, if I'm going to measure to this squadron, I'm going to measure from the cardboard of my ship to the cardboard of the squadron. And the same thing goes for measuring to another ship. I measure from the cardboard of the ship to the cardboard of the ship. I do not measure from any plastic components on the ships or squadrons. I do not measure from the shield dials. Now, the plastic framing of the ship and the shield dials do come into play when it comes to overlapping or determining line of sight. I'll discuss that more in detail in the combat section of the video. And one other distinction, squadrons have this tab on the side. This tab is ignored for all purposes except for determining whether or not it has activated. You never measure to it, you never take it into account when determining whether you are overlapping, etc. If, for example, you are going to overlap with another squadron, you can't place it, or on a ship, you can just rotate if you need the space, just to make sure it's in the same general, as close as you can be to the same location. These are examples of squadrons in the game. This TIE Interceptor squad here has 3 hit points. That's what these numbers determine, and when taking damage you just slide this dial around to the arrow to determine how many hit points the squadron has left. The symbol here represents what type of squadron it is and special abilities the squadron has. And this tab is used for determining whether the squadron has activated or not, and it corresponds with the turn marker. So, with the turn marker, if it's on the blue side, and it's on the blue side of the symbol, it means it has not activated, and you slide it over to show it has activated and is ready for the next turn. I'll discuss that in more detail in the squadron section. And one final thing here with Darth Vader, for ace squadrons, you will see their picture on the squadron dial so that you can easily distinguish them. One final thing for these ships and squadron models, these tabs on the back are used for placing identity markers. So this token represents that the commander is on this corvette, and then you would take the matching token and place it on the ship card in your play area. And if you have multiple ships of the same type of corvette, let's say you have multiple corvettes, to distinguish between them, you would then put the numbered token instead and place the corresponding number token on the ship in your play area. You will also notice that squadrons have those tabs on the back. You will only ever use these if you're fighting against a similar side, or you're doing multiplayer games with like 2v2s. So let's say I'm playing another Imperial player and he's also bringing TIE Interceptors. I would just want to use a generic token here to indicate that the ones with the tokens are my TIE Interceptors and the ones without are his. There are differences in ship hull sizes, and that is based on the plastic base that your ship is placed upon. We have small, medium, and large. There is a 4th ship size called huge. Currently that is the Superstar Destroyer. You take another large and it is placed in front of this one and it combines for one huge ship. The main importance of determining ship size is whenever you are resolving the evade defense token and other special interactions with rules with upgrade cards, etc. In this section, I'm going to briefly go over how to create a fleet, just the bare minimum basics. More details on advanced fleet building and strategies, etc. I will be discussing in future videos, but for now we're just going to go over the fundamentals. The first thing you must do is pick a commander. And remember, commanders are those who do not have a symbol in the bottom left of their card. So for this fleet, we're going to have Grand Moff Tarkin as our commander, and as you can see on the bottom right, he is worth 28 points. Next, let's pick our ship. So I'm going to pick a Victory II class Star Destroyer. It is a powerful, medium-sized ship for the Empire. And this is kind of how you would set the cards in your play area once you have built your fleet. So we have Grand Moff Tarkin loaded on the Victory II. And again, notice there is no symbol here for commander on your upgrade slots, but that's because every ship can have a commander except for flotillas. Next, we are going to pick an officer, Director Krennic. And notice how I match the symbols on the left side here to the symbol on the upgrade availability for the ship. And also keep in mind, we now have spent 85 points on the Victory II and 8 points on Director Krennic. And as a reminder, because there are dots next to their names, it means that those upgrades are unique. And you can only have one copy of a unique upgrade in your entire fleet. Next, we will go ahead and add some XX9 turbo lasers. And these are not unique, as you can see that there is no dot next to the name. And these cost 5 points. Now let's add some squadrons. We are going to get Darth Vader. He is a very powerful squadron, and he is worth 21 points. And he is also a unique squadron, but in addition he is an ace, which means he has defense tokens that he can use. And as a reminder, when building fleets, the number of aces you can have in your fleet is equal to how many 100 points you have for building your fleet. So we are in a 200 point range right now for building a starter fleet, so I could only have 2 aces in my fleet. But I'm just going to have Darth Vader for now. Next, I'm going to add Gamma Squadron to show you an example of a unique squadron that is not an ace. Notice it still has the dot, but no defense tokens. So you are not limited by the number of unique squadrons you can have in your list, only by the number of points you have to spend. And for this example, these are worth 10 points, and Darth Vader is worth 21 points. Now, Gamma Squadron is a TIE Bomber Squadron. You can only have one of Gamma Squadron, but you can have multiple TIE Bomber Squadrons in addition to Gamma Squadron. And lastly, we are going to include a TIE Interceptor Squadron, which is worth 11 points, which brings us up to 168 points out of 200. Lastly, when building your fleet, you have to select your missions. And when selecting your missions, you have to select one from the red category, one from the yellow category, and one from the blue category. And then these are kept secret, and after you determine who the first player is, the first player picks the missions of the second player. And I will go into more detail of that process when we do the setup and deployment. Now, when it comes to strategies for picking missions, those will be covered in future videos, but a brief breakdown on how to read a mission card. Almost all, if not all, mission cards at the top will have the setup area. And most missions have special rules for setup that change the basic rules for setup. Lots of missions have special rules that activate during the game, whether it's at the end of round, in the middle of a turn, etc. And some missions also have end-of-game rules that only apply when the game is over. More details on that when we discuss mission strategies in future videos will be forthcoming. Once you have your fleet built and your mission selected, you're now ready to play the game and get set up for your first battle of Star Wars Armada. I would like to do some more clarifications on squadrons when it comes to fleet building, where things could be confusing when it comes to their restrictions when building a fleet. So, to reiterate, Darth Vader is a unique squadron, but also an ace, because he has defense tokens. And since we're building a 200-point fleet, I can only have 2 aces in my fleet, and that is because I get one ace equal to every 100 points of the fleet sizes that we are building. That does not restrict how many unique squadrons I can have. So I have Gamma Squadron here, which is a unique TIE Bomber Squadron, and Saber Squadron, which is a unique TIE Interceptor Squadron. I now have 3 unique squadrons, but I am not breaking the rule of building a fleet with squadrons with 200 points because I only have one that is considered an ace. Now some more details when it comes to generic squadrons. TIE Interceptors, you will only have one card for that, but this card represents every TIE Interceptor that you have in your fleet. Right now, we have just one TIE Interceptor. Let's say I want to have another TIE Interceptor. I can then add another one while paying an additional 11 points for this second TIE Interceptor. Now let's say I wanted to add a third TIE Interceptor. This actually would be illegal in my 200-point game because that brings me up to 76 squadron points. And 1/3 of 200 points, which is the limit of squadrons, is 67 for my game. So I would have to take away this TIE Interceptor, and then I would be down to 65 squadron points, which would keep me under the limit for my 200-point game. And this would now then be a legal build for my squadrons. So in review, you can have a number of aces equal to the number of 100 points that you're using to build your fleets. So in a 200-point game, you can have 2 aces. In a 400-point game, you can have 4 aces. And aces are represented by the defense tokens at the bottom of the squadron card. You are not limited to the number of unique squadrons you have, squadrons that have a dot next to their names. But you cannot have multiple copies of the same unique squadron. And then for generic squadrons, you use the same card for multiple squadrons to represent them on the table. And lastly, you must keep your squadron point total below or at 1/3 of your total fleet point value rounded up. So for a 200-point game, it is 67 points of squadrons is the maximum you can have. And in a standard 400-point game, 134 points is the maximum number of squadrons you can build in that kind of fleet. In this section of the tutorial, we're going to go over setup and deployment. And before you get started with setting up your game, I would recommend it's probably best just to get all of your ships and fleets in order. So for example, I've got my test fleet I built. I've got my ship here on the left with the ship card, its defense tokens set up and ready to go. Its speed dial, but ignore that number, you don't set that yet. The command dials that I need, and I have a command dial for every number on my command value, so command value 3. Therefore I need 3 command dials. The upgrades that are on the Victory, Darth Vader with his defense tokens, and a TIE Interceptor squad. Now as I mentioned in the tokens section, I no longer have the standard turn marker, so I'll just be using this custom one that I had ordered from Garrett Vance at Admiral Tater's ship shop, and I use that to indicate which turn I am on. However, you will have a turn marker in your game if you just have the core set, and you will start with it on the blue side. I also make sure I have all my obstacles. For a 300-point game, or actually this is a setup for a 200-point game, you would not use all of these obstacles. I'll get to that in a moment with deploying obstacles. And make sure you have your maneuver tools and your range rulers, as well as your dice. And then right here I have my mission cards. The mission cards remain secret until after you determine who the first player is. Now right here, I've got these little markers marking off my deployment zone. This is as far out as I can go when deploying my ships. And the distance of these is distance 3 on the range ruler. and that is how far out you can deploy a ship when deploying ships. And I'm going to show you real quick an example of when you're setting up in an actual 6x3 area. As you can see, my table is too small to actually do the full 6x3, but just to give you an example of what the deployment zone would look like and how you set up those deployment markers in a full game on a 6x3 mat. Okay, now let's pretend you're setting up on your 6x3 mat, and this is the far left edge of your side of the 6x3 area. So first thing you need to do is determine how far up the board you can deploy, which is up to distance 3, and you place your marker like so. But then you have to move the marker further in from the left edge here, and that is the full distance, distance 5 of the ruler. So you would just take this marker and slide it over like so, and then just make sure that you're still at distance 3. And then that is the far left edge that you can deploy to when you're playing on a full 6x3 mat. There are some additional rules that might let you deploy outside your deployment zone, and it's called the setup area. I will go into that in more detail when we discuss the missions which would allow that kind of deployment to happen. Next, once you've gotten yourself organized and gotten your deployment zone set up, you need to determine who the first player is. How this works in Armada, whoever comes in with the least amount of points gets to determine who the first player is. So let's say we're playing a 200-point game, and I show up with a fleet of 195 points, and my opponent shows up with a fleet of 200 points on the nose. I would then get to choose whether or not I am first player. However, if you both have the same point total, you need to flip a coin, roll a dice, etc. to determine who the first player is. And I recommend using the dice that's actually in the game, and that is the blue dice. This is what's called a D8, or an 8-sided dice. And on the blue dice, it's unique in that 4 of its facings have regular hits, and 4 of its facings do not. So whenever I'm playing with my friends and we come in with the same point totals, because we usually do, we both like coming in with the maximum amount of points that you can bring, we just roll off. And I'll say, I will pick the hits side, and roll. It came out to a not hit side, so my opponent would then be able to choose whether or not they want to be first player. Once you determine who the first player is, that's how you select missions. And this is an important part of deciding whether or not you want to be first or second player. The first player chooses the second player's missions. This is an important distinction. So on my fleet, I brought these 3 missions. And if I choose to be first player, these missions will not be used, even though I selected them in my fleet build. I will be choosing the missions that my opponent brought, but I don't know what they are yet. Now let's say my opponent decided to be first player, and he wants to choose my missions. So then, he will flip my missions over, see what I brought, and choose between these 3 missions of what we are going to play. Now there's a reason for this. First players usually has a slight advantage in gameplay because it allows you, if you're in position, you can shoot first before the enemy can shoot you. There are advantages for going second, and that kind of high-level strategy of whether you want to go first, second, delaying actions, etc. I'll discuss that in future videos when it comes to combat tactics and overall strategy. All missions give advantages to the second player. So even though the first player is choosing what mission you do, it's the second player that will gain the advantage. So in review, the first player chooses the second player's mission. So whenever you are deciding whether or not you want to be first player, if it's your choice, you have to choose, do I want to choose my opponent's missions that I don't know what they are, or do I want to make him first player to choose one of my missions that I selected in the fleet build, which I know will advantage me? And that's something you have to consider when you're building your fleet and when you're deciding whether or not to be first player, if it is your choice. Once you've selected the mission, now it is time to place obstacles. Now, I'm not going to go into any details about special rules with obstacles and specific missions or special setups regarding missions. We're just doing basic setup here. Now, in a normal game, you will start with 1 station, 3 asteroids, and 2 debris fields. And they all have to be the unique copies of one another. If you have multiple core sets, or you might have bought some of the campaign packs, you'll get extra copies of these obstacles, but you cannot have 2 copies of the asteroid of this shape when you're deploying. They all have to be unique. And when you're playing in a full 6x3 mat, these are the obstacles you'll be using for every game as a general rule. As stated before, certain missions use different obstacles, less obstacles, etc. For this example for deployment though, since we're only on a 3x3 board, it is recommended to take away 1 asteroid field and 1 debris field, and still use the station, just to make sure the board isn't as cluttered. Now when you are deploying, whenever you are placing the obstacles, the second player chooses which one to place first. So let's say I'm the second player, I'm going to choose to place the station first. This deployment here would be illegal, because obstacles and stations with general setup has to be distance 3 away from any edge, and you will see that it is too close. But if I just slightly move this forward, it is now outside of distance 3, and that is a legal placement. It will then go to the next player to choose an obstacle. So the next player, let's say, will choose this debris field, and he wants it close to this station to make it a little bit more hazardous to fly around it. This would be an illegal placement, because obstacles and stations must be at distance 1 away from each other. So now that I have moved it out to at least distance 1 away, this is now a legal placement of this debris field. And then you just go back and forth until all obstacles are placed on the board. Now it is time to deploy ships. And the first player deploys the first ship. So basic rules for deployment. You have to deploy a ship first. So I will bring out my Victory. When deploying the ship, it cannot go beyond distance 3. You have your marker here to help you see the line, but you can also use your distance ruler and make sure it does not go past distance 3. And you can set it back if you wish. It can be set at any angle you wish. You can even send it backwards, but I would not recommend that because the ship would fly off the board and would be out of the game. When placing at an angle, be careful to make sure that the far corner does not extend past the edge. This would be an illegal placement because even though this corner is behind 3, your ship is actually sticking out beyond the distance 3 deployment area. So make sure that your entire ship is behind distance 3 if you want to place it as far out as it can go. Once you place your ship, that is when you must set your speed dial. Now the Victory can only go speed 1 or 2, so I have the options of speed 1 or 2, and I'm just going to select speed 1 for now. After I place my ship, it'll then be time for the second player to place their ship. For example, then they could the second player can bring in his Nebulon and do their ship placement following the same rules and guidelines as the first player. Squadrons are unique in their placement. After you have a ship on the board, when it comes back to you on your turn, you can start placing your squadrons. So let's say my opponent placed his Nebulon on the other side of the board, and I want to place my squadrons now. I have 2 squadrons, my Darth Vader and my TIE Interceptor, and they have a rule where they have to be placed within distance 2 of another ship. And that means they can also extend beyond the distance 3 of the deployment area. So let's say my Victory is right here at distance 3, and I want my fighters to be further out. So I can actually place them beyond the deployment zone just as long as I remain within distance 2. If I place this TIE interceptor a little bit further out, that is an illegal placement. The TIE interceptor needs to make sure that we are within distance 2 for both squadrons. And that also goes for angles. You can do it at any angle. You can have it as close as you want. Place it around the ship, behind the ship, just as long as your 2 squadrons are within distance 2 of a ship that you're placing. And when you place squadrons, you place 2 squadrons at a time. So let's say I had 6 squadrons I wanted to place. I could only pick 2 of them to place, and then it would go back to my opponent's turn to place. Now there is another rule when it comes to placing squadrons. So let's say my opponent here, the rebels, and he has 2 ships and 1 squadron. He has to place a ship first. So place the ship, set the speed dial, goes back to the Imperial player, then it comes back to the Rebel player. And the Rebel player wants to place his 1 squadron, Luke Skywalker. However, he cannot do that because he only has 1 squadron. You can only place squadrons in multiples of 2 until the very end of deployment. So since he only has 1 squadron in his fleet, he has to play a ship and place the ship in the deployment area. He cannot deploy his lone squadron until the end of deployment as his last deployment. And that goes for any odd numbers. Let's say he had 5 squadrons, and he can place 2, 2, but then he cannot place the 1 until all of his ships have been placed, and then he can place his 1 squadron. So once all fleets have been deployed, and you've deployed your obstacles in the station, you have your components ready, you've set the speed on all of your ships. You have not set, just so you know, you have not set dials yet. We'll come to that here in the next video. And you have it set to turn 1. You know your mission. You are ready to go to turn 1 and start the command phase. In this section, we are going to be discussing commands, the planning, what command value means, and what each command does through dials and through tokens. So at the start of every round is what's called the command phase, and that is whenever you plan your commands for each of your ships. At the start of the first round, that's when you plan all of the commands for your ships that have multiple command dials. For example, on the left side here for the Victory II class Star Destroyer, you will notice its command value is 3. That means you must have 3 command dials planned for it at all times, up until the end of the game. And I'll give an example of that here shortly. So that means, since it is a bigger ship, you have to plan 3 turns in advance of what you want to do, as opposed to a CR-90A Corvette, for example. It has a command value of 1. That means at the start of every command phase, you just plan 1 dial. You don't have to plan multiple turns ahead. You can always change on the fly what you are doing. And this simulates how smaller ships have smaller crews and can react faster to the changing situations on the battlefield. How you plan your command is you take your dial and you turn it to whichever command you want it to be. We have squadrons, concentrate fire, engineering, and navigate. And when you plan your next command, you place it under your first command. So the command on the top is what will be happening first. This command will be happening on round 2. And then for my third command, this is what would happen on turn 3. And I would place them face down next to my ship, or you can place them on your ship card. And these are secret information. You do not tell your opponent what commands you are planning. And for the single command, you just set the command that you want and place it face down on the card. Once everyone has planned all of their commands, you then go to the ship phase, and the ship phase is when you go back and forth between players choosing ships to activate. When you choose a ship, you reveal the top command. So on my Victory 2, its top command would be a navigate. I would then do the full effects of my ship activation, which I'll go into further detail in one moment. And then once that is done, it then goes to the next player. So the next player, the Rebel player, would reveal its CR-90 with a concentrate fire command. At the end of every round, you have what's called status phase. And then this is where you remove these commands. You then go to the next round, and you have now the command phase, again on the next round. And you have to make sure you get back up to your command value on your ships. So, since I have a command value 1 on my CR-90A, I need to plan a command for the next turn. And it will be for the next turn because I only have one command, so I know this will activate next turn. For the Victory, however, my next command will be going to the bottom of this pile. The next command I plan will not happen for 3 more turns. So you are allowed to look at commands you have already set. Let's say I forgot what this command was and I want to look at it. You can look at it, but you cannot change it. You cannot flip the order of how these commands are placed. So be careful not to change the order that the commands are already in, because you cannot change them once they are set. So I'll take my new command now, set it up, and then place it face down. So the command I just planned for is now at the bottom, and in 3 turns that command will activate. Now the reason why I made the comment about when you get near the end of the game you will not have to worry about it anymore. So let's say we reveal a command and it is round 4 and we do all the movement. It's now the end of the round. We are in the status refresh phase and we are now going to the top of round 5, and it's time to start planning commands. Normally the sequence would be, since I have to have 3 commands on my ship, I would start planning my next command to place at the bottom. However, there are only 2 turns left, and I've already got 2 turns worth of commands planned. So there's no need to plan any more commands for my Victory, since I don't have to worry about it. I've already got my commands set for turn 5 and turn 6. The CR-90, on the other hand, I would need to plan a command, because it only has a command value of 1. So every round, even the last round, I still need to plan a command to make sure it is good to go. Next, we're going to talk about each individual command, the dials and tokens, and explain what they do in depth. We're going to start with the 2 commands that happen once you reveal them. That's going to be engineering and squadrons. Let's start with engineering. When you reveal an engineering dial, you get a number of engineering points equal to the engineering value of your ship. So on the top right you will see here, this Nebulon B escort frigate has an engineering value of 3. That means I get 3 engineering points to spend to repair my ship. 1 point is required to move shields around your ship, 2 points can raise a shield from scratch, and 3 points can be used to discard a damage card. So here I have my damaged Nebulon. You can see my sides both have full shields and my aft have full shields, but my front has taken a couple hits. My shields are down to 1 out of a possible 3. So my options with 3 engineering points, I could spend 2 points to just raise the shields by 1. I could then also take shields from the back, 1 shield for 1 point, and raise the shields back up to maximum. I could also, instead, take a shield from the side and a shield from the side for 1 point each, and raise shields to maximum, and still have 1 point remaining. And I can do this in any combination that I wish. and it is done one at a time. You spend 1 point at a time, or 2 points at a time to raise your shield, or 3 points at a time to heal damage cards. And when you're moving shields around your ship, they do not have to be adjacent. They can move from opposite ends or adjacent hull zones. The most powerful way to use your engineering is to heal damage cards, and that requires 3 engineering points. Fortunately for my Nebulon, it has an engineering value of 3, so just with the dial, I get a full 3 points, and I can heal this damage card. Now let's say I have no damage, and I revealed an engineering command, and all of my shields are full. I can choose instead to discard the dial and get an engineering token instead. Engineering tokens give you half of your engineering value rounded up. One interesting interaction between dials and tokens is that they can be combined to create more powerful effects. When it comes to engineering, you get to add up all of your engineering value together. So let's say I have an engineering token, and I reveal a dial, and it is an engineering dial. So I get the dial's effects of 3 engineering, and the token's effects of half my value rounded up, which would be 2. So that would give me 5 engineering points. And I have to spend these all at the same time. And this is important to note that when you do a dial and token combo, you have to do the effects at the same time. This will become important when we talk about concentrate fire. And important to note when I was talking about you spend the points one at a time, critical effects are face-up effects that cause additional problems for your ships. Capacitor failure, I cannot raise shields if my hull zone has 0 shields while I have capacitor failure in play. But this is what I can do with my 5 engineering points I have here. I reveal the dial, gain 3, spend the token, and gain 2 more, so I have 5. I then spend the 3 engineering points that I have out of 5 to heal this damage card. Keep in mind, spending 3 engineering points heals damage cards regardless of whether or not they are face up or face down. It is always a good rule to heal your critical damage to face up cards first. Now that this capacitor failure is gone, I have 2 engineering value left, and I am no longer restricted on raising my shields that have gone down to 0. So then, let's say my front shields were down to 0, I can now raise them by 1 by spending 2 points, or I can redirect 2 shields from all their hull zones to the front to raise them by 2 points. One thing important to note about tokens, and this goes for all command tokens. You cannot have duplicate command tokens on your ship, so I cannot have 2 engineering tokens or 2 concentrate fire tokens, etc. I also cannot have more tokens on my ship than my command value. So with my Nebulon, my command value is 2. Therefore, the maximum number of tokens I can have sitting on my ship is 2. Let's say, for example, when I revealed my engineering command, I had a squadron token and a concentrate fire token, and I didn't want to use my engineering dial because I am at full health and I wanted to take a token. I would discard the dial, and then I would take the token, but I would have to discard one of my other tokens in order to gain the engineering token. So let's say I discard my concentrate fire token. This is now a legal placement of having tokens on my ship. Another thing to note, and I will say this here, you cannot spend multiple tokens of the same type. So let's say I had multiple copies of the squadron token. That would be illegal. There is one ship that lets you do that. But let's say you are on that ship that lets you have multiple tokens of the same type. I cannot spend multiple tokens of the same type. But I could spend multiple tokens of different types. So let's say I have a squadron token and a concentrate fire token, and an engineering token, and I reveal this concentrate fire dial. Before I start shooting, once I reveal this dial, I have to choose if I want to use the squadron or engineering token, because squadron and engineering happen when you reveal dials. So I could choose now to activate a squadron, and I could choose to spend this token to gain half of my engineering value rounded up, which would be 2. Next, let's briefly talk about the squadron command. When you reveal a squadron dial, that is when you choose whether or not to use it. With a dial, you can activate a number of squadrons equal to the squadron value of your ship. So with this Nebulon B escort frigate, I can activate 2 squadrons with my squadron dial. Let's say I did not want to activate squadrons right now. I can then choose to discard the dial and gain a squadron token. Squadron tokens, when it is your turn, when you reveal a dial, let's say I reveal a concentrate fire dial, but I want to activate a squadron. I have to do this first. I spend my concentrate fire token and activate 1 squadron. Keep in mind, this is not like engineering. Squadron tokens do not give you half of your squadron value. Squadron tokens let you activate 1 squadron. Similar to engineering, you can combine these two together. So let's say I already have a squadron token. I can reveal my squadron dial and gain 2 squadron activations and spend my token to gain a 3rd squadron activation. I will go into more details about squadrons, how you activate them, ranges, etc. in the squadrons section of this video. Now let's talk about concentrate fire. I will be going into more detail on how concentrate fire interacts with attacking when I do the in-depth explanation of attacking and defending between ships in that section. However, briefly, and what a concentrate fire dial does, it gives you an extra dice that you can use. Let's say I'm attacking at my front arc. I get 3 red dice, so I would gather 3 red dice. I would roll my attack, and then I can choose to add another red dice with my concentrate fire dial. That is the basics of it. There are more details and interactions that I will get into in the attack section of this video, but I just want to give you a brief overview. If you choose, you can spend the dial to gain a concentrate fire token. The concentrate fire token lets you re-roll a dice. So when you're attacking, I can spend this token and re-roll my dice to see if I get a better result. Just like with squadrons and with engineering, you can combine them for increased effects. You can spend your concentrate fire dial to gain a dice. So for example, again, in my front, I've already rolled these. I gain a dice of the same color, would be a red dice, and then I can spend a token to re-roll. And as far as interactions go, as I mentioned earlier, when you are doing this combo with concentrate fire, they both have to be done at the same time. I cannot concentrate fire to add in a dice, and then finish my attack, and then go into the next sequence to attack out of another hull zone, and then spend the token with my second attack to re-roll. So just to repeat, with concentrate fire, and I will go over this again when we go in the attack sequence of the video, when you're doing the combination of concentrate fire, dial, and token, they must be done at the same time together. Lastly, we have the maneuver command. When you reveal a maneuver command, you could choose to spend the dial and gain a token for use later, or you can use the dial and the token. What the dial lets you do, it allows you to change your speed. Remember, whenever we did deployment, once you set your ship down, you have to set a speed. And right now, my Nebulon is going speed 2. The way you change speed is with the navigate command. So with a dial, I can change my speed by 1. So I can go down to speed 1, up to speed 3, because my Nebulon can go speed 1, 2, or 3. If I was at speed 1, I could also choose to go down to speed 0 and stop. that is rarely useful, and I definitely don't recommend it because it has to do with defense tokens. I will discuss that in the defense token part of this video. Another thing that the maneuver dial lets you do, and this is in addition to changing speed, you can do and or, is change the number of clicks you get on your maneuver tool. And the clicks are these little notches at each section. And these symbols here determine how many clicks you get at each section on the tool based on what speed you're going. I will be going into more detail on what all that means and how that interacts in different movement styles, etc. in the movement section of this video. With a token, you can spend the token to change your speed. You cannot change your yaw value, that's the click value I was talking about. It's also called the yaw value with a token. You can only do that with a dial. But you can change your speed. These effects can be combined to do a large change in speed. So let's say my Nebulon is going speed 1. I had a token on the ship, and I reveal a navigate dial. I can spend both of these at the same time to increase my speed to 3. Again, I will be going into more detail on maneuvering and using navigates in the movement section of this video. A quick clarification on command dials and when you choose whether or not you are taking a token or using the dial. I discovered this myself as I was reviewing my videos, that you must choose whether or not to take the dial or token when you reveal the dial. And that goes for every single command, whether it is a navigate shown here, engineering, squadron, or concentrate fire. So when you reveal your dial, even though you're not going to be performing your navigates until the movement step, you have to decide now whether or not you're going to use the dial or the token. Same goes for concentrate fire. You have to decide when you reveal the dial whether or not you're going to add a dice with a dial or take a token to be able to re-roll a dice when you start attacking. In review, when you reveal a command dial, that is when you have to decide if you're going to use the dial or spend the dial to gain a token, regardless of which command it is you've revealed. A few notes about spending multiple commands on a single ship activation. One thing that is illegal: you cannot spend two types of the same command dial. There are advanced interactions that can happen, namely with Thrawn, which you will see me using a lot on my channel and my battle reports, where he can give a dial to his entire fleet in addition to a dial that is revealed. And for example, if I reveal on my ship an engineering dial and Thrawn has an engineering dial, I do not get the benefits of both. I can only do one. However, if the Thrawn dial was a navigate dial, I would get the benefits of both of these dials. I can also spend multiple copies, not multiple copies, but I can spend multiple command tokens, but I cannot spend tokens of the same type multiple times. There is one ship called the Executor where you can have multiple tokens of the same type, but even on that ship I cannot spend more than one token of the same type. So as a rule, when you reveal commands, you can resolve the effects of multiple commands, but the commands cannot be of the same type. And also, as a review, when you're spending multiple commands, you can combine command dials and command tokens. So for example, if this is what I have on my ship, it is a command value 3 ship, so I can have 3 tokens, and I reveal this engineering dial. I can spend the dial and the engineering to gain my full engineering value and half my engineering value rounded up together. I can then spend this to activate one squadron with my squadron token, and then when I'm shooting I can spend this token, Concentrate Fire, to reroll one of my dice. In this section, we are going to be discussing defense tokens. To start, we are going to be discussing how you spend them, ready them, and discard them, and different in general interactions when it comes to defense tokens. And then we will be discussing the specifics of each defense token and what it does. First, when a defense token is readied, it means it's on the green side as shown here. If you spend a defense token, you flip it over to the orange side. If you're wanting to defend yourself from an attack and your defense token is already on the orange side, you can still spend it, but you also have to discard it, and therefore it is out of the game. There are certain game effects that might happen where you have to spend and discard a defense token. Even if it's on the green side, you still get the effect of the defense token. These events are rare, except for in the case of evade, which we will be discussing last. When you are being attacked, there's a dice face that is called the accuracy. And what accuracies do, it allows your opponent, when they are attacking you, to assign accuracies to different defense tokens that may be on your ship. So for example, this brace, when my opponent is spending his accuracies during the spend attack dice step, that means I cannot use this defense token when I am trying to defend myself. And when you're defending yourself, that is done during the spend defense token step. And I will want to make sure this is clear, and I will make sure it is clear again when we go over it during the combat section of this video. When you spend defense tokens, it only happens during the spend defense token step of the combat section. So when someone is attacking you and they are gathering a dice, they roll their dice, they add their dice, they modify their dice, they spend their accuracies, then they get to spend defense tokens. When you spend your defense tokens, this is your opportunity to do so. The effects of the defense tokens don't happen quite yet. Some of them do immediately. Some of them, however, the effects of the defense tokens happen during resolving damage or after resolving damage, but you spend them at this point of the attack sequence. Readying defense tokens happens during the status phase of every round. When my defense tokens are in the exhausted state on the orange side, and it comes to the status phase at the end of the round, I then get to ready them by flipping them back over to the green side. If during that round I was forced to actually discard my defense token, I do not get it back in the status phase. Readying only applies for defense tokens that you currently have that are in an exhausted state. So in the status phase, if you have exhausted defense tokens, that is when you are allowed to ready them back to the green side. Another important aspect of defense tokens, when spending your defense tokens, you cannot spend more than one defense token of the same type. For example, this is the defense tokens that come with a Nebulon B escort frigate. It gets 2 braces and an evade, and the reason why you get 2 braces allows you to spend them more often throughout the entire game and to avoid potential accuracies coming in to stop your defenses. Let's say your opponent stops your brace on this side, you could then choose to spend the brace on this side to still have the damage rounding up. Now, what I mean by you can't spend more than one of the same type, say your damage coming in is 3 damage, you can't brace it down to 2 and then brace again down to 1. You also cannot spend the same token twice. You cannot brace it down to 2 and then spend and discard and bracing it down to 1. That is illegal. You can, however, spend multiple defense tokens of different types. So for example, if this attack were coming in from medium range, you could spend your evade to force your opponent to re-roll the blue dice, and let's say it's re-rolled to an accuracy, this accuracy no longer has an effect because we're in the spend defense tokens step of the attack sequence. Again, I'll cover that in more detail during the attack section of this video. And then you could spend the brace to reduce this 2 damage down to 1. To review, you cannot spend 2 defense tokens of the same type, so I cannot spend my brace back to back. I also cannot spend the same defense token more than once in an attack sequence. I can, however, spend multiple defense tokens as long as they are different. For example, I can spend my evade and my brace on the same attack coming in. There are some effects in the game through cards where your opponent discards and spends your token. You do not get the effects of your defense token if you do not spend it. The most obvious effect of this is Admiral Sloan. If she is attacking you with one of her special squadrons and an accuracy is assigned to your brace, Sloan could get you to remove the brace, discarding it and spending it, or turning it from green to orange by spending it. You as the defender do not get the effect of your brace. You only get the effect of your defense tokens if you are the one who is spending them, not your opponent. This is the brace defense token, and when you spend it, it allows you to reduce your incoming damage by half, rounded up. For example, let's say you are attacked and you are receiving 3 damage. You can spend a brace defense to reduce the damage down to 2. Additionally, if you receive 4 damage, you would brace the damage down to 2. So the differences between even damage and odd damage does matter when it comes to bracing. If you're going to be doing 3 damage to someone or 4 damage to someone and they have a brace, the result will be the same. If they choose to brace, it will be reduced down to 2 damage. Let's say this damage is coming in and I already have it on the orange side. I would then have to discard it to reduce the damage down to 2. This is the timing of when brace happens. As I said in the opening of the defense token section, you spend your defense tokens during the spend defense token step of the attack sequence, but the effects happen at different times. So you spend your defense, your brace defense, and other defense tokens you might be spending, and then during the resolve damage step, that is whenever you take your halved damage. This is a redirect token, and this allows you to move damage from one hull zone where you are being attacked to one adjacent hull zone. For example, let's say your Victory class Star Destroyer is being attacked in the front and is receiving 3 damage. You can spend this redirect to take the damage in any combination on the front or an adjacent hull zone, let's say this side here. So I took 1 damage here and then moved 2 damage here. I could have taken no damage on the front and moved all the damage to this side. I could have also taken no damage on the front and moved all the damage to the other side, just as long as the hull zone is adjacent. What I cannot do is redirect the damage to multiple hull zones. I cannot take damage to the left side and the right side if I'm being attacked from the front and using my redirect. I also cannot take the damage on the rear hull zone because the rear hull zone is not adjacent to the front hull zone, and that is where I am being attacked from. And when you are redirecting your damage, you can redirect any number of that damage. So again, to reiterate, let's say, again, I'm being attacked by 3 damage, and in this example, my redirect is on the orange, so I would spend it and discard it, but I spent my redirect, so I am going to want to move it. So I can move, let's say, 2 damage to this side and take 1 damage on the front, or I could take all the damage to this side, or I could take 2 damage on the front, 1 damage on the side, etc. Or I could take the damage on the opposite side, just as long as the hull zone is adjacent and it is only going to 1 adjacent hull zone. To review, when you are redirecting, you can redirect any or all of your damage to 1 adjacent hull zone. I'm being attacked in the front, so I can redirect, when I spend my redirect token, to either this side or this side, any combination of damage. I cannot redirect to both sides, and I cannot redirect to the rear because it is not adjacent. And similar to brace, when you spend your redirect, you spend it during the spend defense token step, but you do not resolve the effects until the assign damage step. A final clarification on redirect: you can only redirect to a hull zone that has shields. In this shot you are seeing here, if I am being attacked in the front and I have no shields on this hull zone, I cannot spend my redirect to move damage to this hull zone. If I have shields on the right hull zone, I can still redirect to the opposite side. However, if both of my hull zones are at 0 health and I am being attacked in the front hull zone, my redirect defense token is not usable because I have no shields on any eligible hull zones to redirect to. This is the contain token, and this is used to ignore the effects of the standard critical effect. And this is the critical effect icon on the dice. When you are receiving damage and there are criticals included in the dice pool, let's say this is the damage coming in, you can choose to spend your contain so your opponent cannot use this critical to resolve the standard critical effect. The standard critical effect means that when you start taking damage on your hull, so for example you're taking damage in the front of your Star Destroyer, there are no shields, the first damage you take, because there is a critical effect if you do not spend your contain, will be a face-up damage card. You spend the contain, you still take the damage of the critical effect, but the damage card is face down. And in this particular example, you would take 3 additional damage because of the total damage is 4. So you would take 1 and then 3 more cards for a total of 4 damage. When it comes to contain, and when you assign your defense token, and when your opponent decides what critical effect to do, I will discuss this further in the combat section, but I will go over it here. Your opponent does not choose what critical effect he is going to do until after your spend defense tokens step. So if your opponent has specialty cards on his ships where his criticals, like say this blue critical, can trigger different types of critical effects, your contain will not be effective. But it is something that you have to decide as the defender. Do you want to go ahead and spend the contain anyway to make sure that he can't do the standard critical effect, even though he might choose to do a non-standard critical effect that he has in his fleet? You have to make the choice before your opponent, the attacker, makes his choice. And there is one specialty card that allows you to spend your contain to avoid all critical effects, and that is called the Damage Control Officer. Also of note, with critical effects coming in, if there are multiple criticals, your opponent only gets to choose to use 1 critical effect whenever a critical is coming in. And when you spend your contain, you stop all instances of the standard critical effect. So even though in this attack there are 2 criticals coming in on the dice, and your opponent only has the option to do the standard critical effect, spending your contain stops all critical effects from coming in. You will still take 2 damage, but you will not be taking your first damage as a face-up damage card. Also of note, in this example on the right, you see your Star Destroyer has one shield, and say this is the only damage coming in. You do not need to spend your contain, because the standard critical effect only matters if you are actually taking damage cards. Since you have a shield here, you will just take 1 damage on the shield, and the critical effect does not matter. So in review, critical effects for the standard critical effect only matter if the damage is taken directly on the hull, with there being no shields. When you spend your contain, it stops all potential standard critical effects coming in, regardless of how many crits are showing on the dice. Contain does not stop specialty critical effects that your opponent may have in his fleet, and you have to make the choice to spend your contain before your opponent makes the choice of what critical effect he wants to have if he has multiple options. Scatter is a very powerful defense token, as this allows you to cancel all incoming damage. For example, let's say you're being attacked, and this is the damage that is coming in on your ship. 9 damage, an incredibly high amount of damage coming in. But there are no accuracies, so the person who is attacking you can't stop your scatter. You can then spend your scatter, and all of this damage is ignored. You will usually find scatter found on flotillas or specialty cards that let you add that token to a ship. It is very powerful, and therefore it is very rare. You will also see scatter on some ace squadrons as well. To review, scatter you will find mostly on flotillas and squadrons and other specialty situations, as it is a very powerful defense token, because when you spend it, you get to cancel all incoming damage. This is the evade defense token, another very powerful defense token that saw several upgrades in the new 1.5 updates of Armada. Evade allows you to do several different things depending on the range that you're being attacked from. Remember, on the ranges, we have long range, medium range, and close range. We also have ranges of distance 1 to 2, and these matter when determining being attacked from squadrons, distance 2 in some rare occasions. So, when you're defending at long range, or, and I should also say, extreme range is whenever you are being attacked, you have your ship here, and you're receiving the attack on your Corvette, and the ship attacking you is off the screen and beyond long range of the ruler. That is called extreme range. Only one ship does that currently, called the Onager. What that means is you get to double the effects of your evade token at extreme range with the long range effect. And the long range effect is when you spend your evade, you get to cancel 1 attack dice. So for example, let us say you're being attacked, and this is the damage coming in, and you are currently at long range. You then spend your evade to cancel 1 dice completely. If you are at extreme range, you can spend your evade to duplicate this effect. You can cancel 1 dice and then a second dice. There is an additional powerful effect with evade, that if you are defending against a ship of a larger ship class than you, let's say the ship doing the attack is this Victory class Star Destroyer, and let's just say, for example, we are still at long range, and this is the damage coming in. I can discard my evade and double the effect and cancel 2 dice. If I were at extreme range, let's just assume for a moment that this was the Onager firing at extreme range. Like I said, just saying that extreme range, for example, we are beyond the range of the ruler. And this is the attack coming in. I get to triple down on the effects of what I get for evade. So I can discard this because it is a larger ship size than me, small versus medium. So I can cancel one dice, cancel one more because I get to duplicate it because it is a larger ship size than me. And because we're extreme range, I get to cancel a dice again. This also works even if your token is already exhausted and you're going to be discarding it anyway. Which, as a general good strategic rule, if your token is already exhausted, still spend you're going to discard your evade anyway, get the maximum effects. So in this instance, if this were an onager firing at extreme range, and you are a smaller ship size than the onager would be, you'll be able to cancel 1 for the effect of the evade, cancel 2 for discarding it, and cancel 3 because you are at extreme range. For evades, the effect is different when you're at medium or close range, or if you are at distance 1 to 2. And that comes into effect with squadrons. Say Vader was here throwing an attack. At all those ranges, distance 1 to 2 and close to medium, the effect of the evade is the same. It allows you to re-roll a dice. So in this example here, I could spend this evade to re-roll one of the dice. Since my ship size is smaller than the ship that is attacking me, I could choose to discard this to re-roll 2 dice. That right there was a good result. And to review, even if it was already exhausted, I could still discard this because I am a smaller size than the person attacking me and re-roll 2 dice. You do not get the benefits of discarding and getting multiple benefits when defending against squadrons, because squadrons are not a smaller size than your ship, or if you are defending from a ship of equal size, for example, this Nebulon B. Since you are both of equal size, you do not get the benefits, the additional benefits of discarding your evade. And that also goes the same for the long-range effects. So in review, when you are spending your evade, if you are defending at long range, you can spend it to cancel 1 dice. If you are defending from a ship larger than you, you can discard it, whether it's green or already used, to double the effects to cancel 2 dice. And if you are at extreme range, you can cancel an additional dice. So if you are defending against a ship larger than you at extreme range, you can cancel up to 3 dice by discarding to double the effects and then canceling 1 additional dice. At medium range, close range, and distance 1 and 2, you can spend the evade to force people to re-roll the dice. And if the ship is a larger ship than you that is attacking, you can also discard, whether it is exhausted or if it is green, to re-roll 2 dice. One final distinction to make with the evade. If you are defending against a larger ship, and this is the dice that you see, you cannot spend this evade, re-roll this result, and it becomes blank, and then just choose to discard to re-roll this result. If you want to get the special effect of having your opponent re-roll both dice at close and medium range, or discarding dice at long range, you must decide all at once if you are going to be using the full effect. So for example here, the evade is on the green. I have to decide now if I want him to re-roll both dice by discarding or re-rolling 1 dice by just spending. And if it's already on the exhausted side, the orange side, might as well go ahead and discard to get the effects of the double effects of re-rolling both dice or discarding both dice. This is the Salvo defense token, and this allows you to shoot back at your opponent when you are receiving an attack. So, for example, this Corvette is attacking the front of this Victory. When I am spending my defense tokens, I can choose to salvo. The salvo doesn't happen until all damage is resolved from the initial attack. But once that happens, I can then shoot back with my printed rear battery armament. And in this case, 2 red dice. And when you are salvoing, the return shot is done from wherever you received the attack. So in this case, I'm being shot front to front. My return shot will be front to front. But the dice I am using is my rear printed battery arc. I am not using my front battery. The reason why the return shot is measured on an exact return line as the original, because it has to do with what hull zone you're attacking your opponent at, which will be the same, front to front in this case, and also for determining line of sight and obstruction. Line of sight, obstruction, and firing arcs are things we will discuss in the combat section in more detail, which I will also go over salvo again in that section. But I would like to reiterate again, when you are salvoing an attack, you receive the attack, and in this case it is front to front. My opponent finishes their attack step with their dice, modifying their dice and assigning accuracies. I then get to choose to spend my defense tokens. I spend my salvo. The attacker then gets to resolve all critical and damage effects of his attack. I receive my damage by taking my damage cards. Then I get to shoot back with my salvo, with my printed rear battery arc. Some more important notes of salvo. When it says printed rear battery arc, that means what is shown on the cardboard of the ship, or the ship card itself in your play area. You cannot add dice to a salvo attack under any circumstances. So for my Victory, when I salvo back, I will salvo back with 2 red dice, and always salvo back with 2 red dice. Again, exceptions will be made whether the attack is obstructed, and also the range of the attack. And I will go into more detail of that when we are doing the combat section, and I'll go over through different examples of ranges and salvo, etc. If you are defending against a squadron, you can salvo back against a squadron. And when I salvo against a squadron, the dice I use is equal to the anti-squadron battery, which in this case is 1 blue dice. I do not salvo squadrons with my printed rear battery arc. In review, once again, with salvo, I receive an attack, in this case front to front. My attacker resolves all of his dice modifications in assigning accuracies. We go then to the spend defense tokens step. I spend my salvo. I then receive my damage and take my damage cards. And that's also important to point out, even if I am destroyed in the attack, I still get to do my salvo before I am removed. So I receive my damage cards, and after all damage has been resolved, whether or not I've been destroyed, I then shoot back with the printed rear battery armament, in this case, 2 red dice. I cannot add dice to this attack under any circumstances. I can, however, modify the dice by using re-rolls or adjusting the facing of the dice. I also cannot use critical effects on my attack coming back. And if it was a squadron attacking me, I salvo back with my anti-squadron armament, in this case, 1 blue dice. And the return attack always follows the exact same trajectory as the attack that came in on me. In this case, front to front. Returning attack would then be front to front. I will be going into more specific scenarios, where there might be odd occurrences and obstruction, etc., when we do the combat section of this video. For this part of the tutorial, we are going to be talking about combat, attacking and defending. And to start, I want to go over some of the components that are going to be important in this part of the tutorial. One, we're going to be talking about firing arc, hull zones, line of sight, which is these yellow dots, and gathering your dice pools from your battery armaments. And we'll do a brief description at the end when it talks about attacking squadrons. The primary method you will have to use whenever you are starting an armada is the range ruler that comes with the game. You will use that to measure line of sight and to measure your firing arcs. However, for ease of use in this tutorial, I'm also going to be using what I would recommend to be your first purchase after you get the base components of the game, and that is a laser pointer, specifically one that projects a horizontal line on the table. Now let's talk about some basic definitions. Each one of these sections that is separated by the green lines here is a separate hull zone. When you declare an attack, you have to declare which hull zone you are attacking from. If I'm going to attack from my front hull zone, it would be from this section of the ship. If I want to attack from the right hull zone, it would be from this section of the ship, and I would use this battery armament. A ship can fire twice in a round. It cannot fire from the same hull zone. There are exceptions to this, but we are going over the basics in this tutorial. So to review, when firing from a hull zone, you select which hull zone you want to shoot from. I select the front, and then I'll be using this battery armament. Then with my second attack, I can choose a different hull zone. I will select the starboard, and then use this battery armament. When I choose a hull zone to fire from, there are several things I must check. The first thing is my target within the firing arc of my hull zone? And to check your firing arc, you use the lines on the ships. My target is going to be this Nebulon B escort frigate. To check if it is within firing arc, I line up my measuring tool, and since the line goes directly across and hits the Nebulon B, it is within firing arc of my front hull zone. You will also notice when I want to declare my second attack, it is also within firing arc of my right hull zone. This is what is called being double arced, and it allows you to shoot twice at the same ship. The next thing you need to check for is, do I have line of sight? That is what the yellow dots are for on the ship. You must be able to draw an unobstructed line from yellow dot to yellow dot. If your line is unobstructed, then you have a clear line of sight and it is not obstructed. This is an example of an obstructed shot. When I draw a line from yellow dot to the yellow dot of my target, the line passes through this intervening ship. That means that once I collect my dice, in this case 6 dice, because I am at medium range, and I get 3 red and 3 blue at medium range, I have to subtract 1 dice. In this example, there are multiple obstructions, but even though I am obstructed by a ship and a debris field, I still only subtract 1 dice from my dice pool. When determining line of sight, you also have to measure to see if you are crossing the lines on the opponent's ship. In this example, the front arc of my ship is within firing arc of the front arc of my opponent's ship. However, because my line of sight from yellow dot to yellow dot crosses this line, I cannot take a shot on the front arc. But I can still take a front shot on the side arc because my line of sight is clear and it is within the firing arc of my front hull zone. However, for my second shot, if I wanted to, I could declare a shot out of my right hull zone into the front of the enemy ship, and that would be a clear line of sight because from yellow dot to yellow dot, I am not crossing the line of my opponent's ship. Here is another extreme example of determining line of sight and firing arcs for your attack. The easy part, I want to shoot out of my front into the side. That is a clear shot that I can take. It is within the firing arc of my front hull zone and within line of sight of the yellow dots. However, I also want to take a shot from my right side into the side of the enemy ship. This is still legal. Observe. Even though it is very close, my side arc is still barely within arc of the side of this nebulon. It is also clear with line of sight because drawing from yellow dot to yellow dot, I do not cross my enemy's lines on his ship. I am crossing my own line. However, when crossing your own lines, when determining line of sight, you ignore them. To review, when crossing your own lines, when determining line of sight, you ignore them. But if you're crossing your enemy's lines, say for example I readjust this here, I now have the front part of the enemy ship within my side arc. However, line of sight, yellow dot to yellow dot, I am crossing my enemy's line. And that is an illegal shot. While we are here, a quick note on the Salvo defense token that we discussed in the defense tokens section of this tutorial. If this Nebulon B has a defense Salvo token, and I am attacking it from the side arc, going from yellow dot to yellow dot, and within arc into the side, and the Nebulon player chooses to salvo back. He spends his token. He then takes his rear battery armament to shoot back, and you are shooting back on the exact same trajectory. You do not measure from the rear, you measure where you were attacked from. So because the attack was going side to side, the return attack will then be going back side to side. And you measure all forms of obstruction. If there were a ship in between us, the shot would also be obstructed. I also ignore the lines. I'll just adjust this slightly so you can see better. I ignore the lines on my return shot of the enemy ship. If this were me taking a regular shot out of my side arc to this side arc, this shot would be illegal because my line, or my yellow dot to yellow dot, is crossing my opponent's line. However, the exception to this rule is with Salvo. Salvo is a direct shot back, and you do not worry about if you are crossing your opponent's line. So in review, Salvo, you spend your Salvo token to return fire using your rear battery printed armament. However, you take the shot on a direct return line from where the original shot came from. And you ignore the rules for crossing your opponent's lines. When determining line of sight and determining obstruction, if you measure from yellow dot to yellow dot and you cross any portion of the plastic part of an opposing ship when determining line of sight, or any ship, that is considered obstructed. Although you will recall at the very beginning of this tutorial, when talking about range, you measure cardboard to cardboard and you ignore the plastic. This is where the plastic comes into play for determining obstruction and line of sight. However, you do ignore the plastic parts of the shield dial and the shield dial itself. That does not obstruct for line of sight. So in this example, if I'm shooting out of my front arc into the side arc of this Nebulon B, it is within arc, and determining line of sight from yellow dot to yellow dot, it is barely crossing this plastic piece, but that means it is obstructed and I have to remove one dice from my dice pool. However, if it was instead like this, that would be a clear shot because I ignore the shield dial and the plastic parts of the shield dial on other ships when determining line of sight. When choosing to make your attacks, you do not have to shoot at the same ship when you are choosing your separate hull zones. I can choose out of my front arc to shoot at this ship. It is within arc and within line of sight. And then when I declare my second attack, I want to shoot out of my right hull zone. And I have two options because both ships are within arc and both ships are also within line of sight. Now we will be discussing the attack sequence. When you declare an attack, first you must measure if you are within arc and within line of sight. This is an easy one. I want to shoot out of my front of my Victory 2 into the front of the Nebulon B. My front arc is within arc of the ship and my target and within line of sight. And my line of sight is not crossing any of my opponent's lines. The next step is I determine range. And you measure cardboard to cardboard. And then this Nebulon is falling within medium range. In medium range, I get to fire all of my red and blue dice. So that would be 3 red and 3 blue dice for the front battery armament of my Victory 2. Once I have gathered my dice, I then roll my dice. Here is the results. After I have rolled my dice, I then modify my dice, and this includes adding dice from concentrate fire dials, re-rolling dice with concentrate fire tokens, and other ways of modifying dice through different upgrade cards and special abilities. Once I have finished modifying my dice, for example, I spend my concentrate fire dial, add a dice. And when I'm adding a dice, I can only add a dice that is already in my dice pool. So I choose to add a red. I then choose to spend my concentrate fire token to re-roll this dice. And as a reminder, back to the command dial section, when I choose to spend my command dial, I have to also choose at that moment if I'm going to spend my command token. They must be spent together at the same time. However, I could use this token to re-roll a separate dice in my pool if I wanted to. After I am done modifying my dice, I then assign accuracies. I have plenty of accuracies here, and in this example, I will just block all of my defenders' defense tokens. So my defender, when we go to the spend defense token step, which is next, my defender cannot spend any defense tokens. We then move on to the resolve damage step. The opponent is receiving 2 damage, and one of that damage is a critical. And if any of that damage impacts the hull of the ship, the damage will be face up. However, my opponent currently has 3 shields. So he takes both damage on the front shields. Let's continue with this example. Let's say my opponent only had 1 shield and is receiving 2 damage, and one of them is a critical. My opponent would take 1 damage, and then I, as the attacker, would choose to resolve the standard critical effect because I have a critical, and it would be a face-up damage card. Addendum: I choose the critical effect before I apply damage. I will repeat this: regardless of the critical effect, you choose the critical effect before you start applying damage. Let's reset this example. I now want to make an attack, but this time I am at long range. At long range, I can only fire with red dice, and I have 3 red dice in my front battery armament. Therefore, I gather my 3 dice. I then roll my dice. I then modify my dice. For example, concentrate fire dial and token. I will add a red, and I have to add a red. I cannot add a blue. I also cannot add a black dice. I can only add a dice that is already of a color that is already in my dice pool. I then add a dice. Spend this token to reroll. Again, to clarify, when I chose to spend this command dial to re-roll, I must also choose to spend the token at the same time if I want to use it. In this example, I would not want to re-roll, but I still must spend the token. It would just have no effect. Let's say in this example, my roll was not nearly as effective. Only 3 hits. So, I gathered my dice, I rolled my dice, and we'll say this is the result. I then modify my dice, and I currently have no means of modifying my dice. I don't have a command token, I don't have a command dial, I don't have any upgrade cards that lets me re-roll. We then go to assign accuracies. I have no accuracies. Therefore, we proceed to the spend defense token step. This is where the defender gets to choose which defense tokens, to spend. In this case, he will spend an evade to cancel this double because it is at long range, and evades let you cancel a dice at long range. I could also choose, since I am a smaller ship size than the attacker, I could choose instead to discard this evade to double the effect and discard both dice. I could even do that if I had previously spent this evade on a separate attack, and this was the state of it when I first received my attack. I could still discard this and get rid of both dice. Let's say on this attack I did not have my evade. I could then spend my brace, and that would brace it down to half rounded up. So it would brace this 3 damage down to 2. And I would have to take 2 damage, and since I have no shields, I have to take 2 face down damage cards. If there was a critical effect in this attack, and these were the defense tokens the Nebulon had. During the spend defense token step, I would spend my brace, reduce the damage from 3 down to 2, but the critical is still there. The critical does not go away. I have no shields. Therefore, the first damage I take must be face up, and then I take a second damage. And the reason why the first damage is face up is because as the attacker, I choose the standard critical effect, which is the first damage card you take is face up. Here are some more examples of different defense token interactions. These defense tokens are not the tokens a Nebulon B has, but for the purpose of this example, this Nebulon B has these defense tokens. So, I am at long range. I choose to fire at long range, so I gather my 3 red dice. I make my roll, and we get a double, and an accuracy. I have a concentrate fire dial and token. I am going to choose to spend both. And I have to choose before I roll. So I add a dice with the dial. Say this came to a blank. I then spend my token to re-roll, and it comes up as an accuracy. If it came up as a hit, and I don't want to re-roll, I still spend the token because I had to make the choice before I chose to spend the dial. So in this example, we have 2 double hits, a crit, and an accuracy coming in to this Nebulon Corvette. I have modified my dice. I then spend accuracies, and I will accuracy one of the braces. This Nebulon has 2 braces, so in the spend defense token step, he cannot spend this brace, but he can spend this brace, which would then reduce the damage down to half, rounded up, which would be 3. I then spend a redirect, and I have a shield to redirect one of the damages too. So I have 3 damage left, and I redirect 1 damage. You can only redirect, as a review from the previous section, 1 hull zone, and it has to be adjacent. If I had multiple shields here, I could take 1, 2, and then 1, or any combination thereof, as long as it is going to an adjacent hull zone and only 1 adjacent hull zone. I cannot redirect to the rear hull zone. There is also a critical effect coming in. Even though the brace reduced damage, you do not get rid of the crit. So I have redirected my 3 damage, so I take 1 here. I have 2 damage remaining that I must take, and it will be going on my front hull zone, and I have no shields there. Therefore, 2 damage is coming through. One of them is a crit. I must now make a choice whether or not I want to contain, which stops the standard critical effect, which is a face-up damage card. However, I have a special critical effect on my victory, that I could spend this red critical on a specialty card that I have. Contains do not stop special crits or non-standard crits. However, I do not know what the attacker is going to do with his critical effect. And even though I do not know yet, I still must make my choice now on whether or not to spend the contain. I will choose to spend the contain to stop the standard critical effect. And I'm going to take this out because it would make a big difference in this example. We then move on. After the spend defense token step, we go to the resolve damage step. And the first part of the resolve damage step, as the attacker, I choose which critical effect I want to apply. I cannot do the standard critical effect because the defender chose a contain. So I will choose to do my specialty critical effect instead. I resolve the effects of that critical effect as well as the defender taking damage. And in this case, it would be 2 damage because there is 2 damage remaining. And the cards are face down because I am doing a specialty critical effect and not the standard critical effect. A note on the difference between standard and non-standard critical effects. I am not going to go into all the different types of non-standard critical effects or specialty critical effects. Those will be covered in a later video, as that is more advanced gameplay. But the basic concepts still apply. Once you are finished resolving dice, or modifying your dice, you've assigned your accuracies, and you go to the spend defense token step. The defender must choose whether or not to use the contain before he knows what his opponent is going to do with his critical effects, because the decision on critical effects happens after the spend defense token step. I want to discuss real quick a potential oddity in the rules when it comes to gathering dice and adding dice, because this can come up with several specialty cards. This will be a generic example. I will not be using any specific example of cards that are in the game. So, I want to make an attack on this Nebulon. We are at long range. I'm within my firing arc of my target, and within line of sight with no obstruction. Therefore, I gather my dice, 3 red dice. Now, I have a specialty card on my ship that allows me to add a dice of any color. This specialty card allows me to add a black dice, or a blue dice, or another red dice. Even though I am out of blue and black range, this specialty card of mine allows me to add a dice of any color. So when I am gathering dice, and I have a specialty card, a theoretical specialty card, that lets me add a dice of any color, even though I am out of black and blue range, I could add a black or blue dice if I wish. For this example, I will add a blue. I then roll my dice. Now, I have my concentrate fire dial, which allows me to add a dice that is in my dice pool. Even though I am at long range, since I have a blue dice in my dice pool, I could add another blue dice. The obvious choice in this example with this theoretical upgrade card, when I am gathering dice, I gather my 3 red dice. I add a dice of any color. I will add a black. I roll my dice. And then in the modified dice defense step, I then use my concentrate fire to add another black dice. Again, the specifics of different specialty cards that allow you to add dice that are not in your dice pool and at different ranges, etc., will be covered in later videos for more advanced gameplay. And the same goes for resolving advanced critical effects, as opposed to the standard critical effect. In review, when I declare an attack, first I declare the hull zone I want to attack from, my front hull zone, and it is in arc of my opponent's front hull zone. Although I am in arc of my opponent's side hull zones, I am not in line of sight because I have to measure yellow dot to yellow dot, and I cannot cross my opponent's lines. Yellow dot to yellow dot, I cross a line, I have no shot on his side arc. I also then measure range. I am in medium range. I then gather the dice allowed at medium range, red and blue. I have 3 red, 3 blue. I then roll my dice. I then, after I've rolled my dice, modify my dice. That includes adding dice with concentrate fire dials, re-rolling dice with concentrate fire tokens, or adding, re-rolling, or changing dice facings based on different specialty cards I may have upgraded on my ship. And again, those special circumstances will be discussed in future tactics and tutorial videos. I'm going to change this to an accuracy for this example. Once I have finished modifying my dice, I then spend my accuracies. I will stop the evade. After assigning accuracies, I then go to spend defense token step. I will spend this brace and reduce damage that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 down to 3. half rounded up. I then assign damage and choose my critical effects. I choose my critical effect to be the standard critical effect, and the opponent then takes damage. He has no shields, therefore all damage is going on the hull. So I resolve the standard critical effect, which the first card is face up, and then 2 remaining damage. And the critical effect is only resolved once, despite having 2 criticals in the dice pool. And one final note when it comes to potential interactions. I have no accuracies. We then go to the spend defense token step. My opponent chooses to spend and discard the evade. We are at medium range, and evades at medium range force the attacker to re-roll 2 dice of the defender's choice when you discard the evade. Since it is a larger ship size than the defender, I can discard the evade to re-roll 2 dice. We will re-roll both of these dice, and they both come to accuracies. As the attacker, I cannot spend those accuracies. Those accuracies are now useless to me because we are in the spend defense token step, and you assign accuracies in the assign accuracies step. I want to discuss a unique situation when it comes to attacking with obstruction. I want to attack with my corvette from my rear arc to the side arc of this victory. However, there is an asteroid in the way, and therefore the attack is obstructed because from yellow dot to yellow dot, my line of sight passes through the obstruction. When a shot is obstructed, you have to remove a dice from your dice pool. When you gather dice, the removal of dice happens before you collect your dice pool. Therefore, in this situation, I have 1 red dice to take a shot out of my rear arc. I check for obstruction. It is obstructed. I have to remove my 1 red dice. Therefore, I do not have a dice pool, and therefore I cannot take the shot. Even if I had other rules, like say a concentrate fire dial, to add a dice. Adding dice to your dice pool happens after you gather dice, and you gather dice after determining obstruction. Therefore, there are several instances where you might not even be able to take a shot. The same thing applies for squadrons. This X-Wing wants to attack this victory. It is in range, within distance 1. But when you draw a line of sight from center stick to yellow dot, it is obstructed by the asteroid field. Therefore, you have to remove the 1 dice that it gets. Obstruction can be a key defense against squadrons because most squadrons only have 1 dice when attacking ships. In this section, we will be discussing movement, how to move, the difference between yaw values or clicks, and overlapping, whether it's overlapping ships, squadrons, or different types of obstacles. First, the basics. How you move is first, you look at what your speed is. For example here, speed 1. You then see the maneuverability of your ship at speed 1. In this case, for this Victory 2, at speed 1, it can get 1 click at the 1 slot on the maneuver tool. And that means this is the 1 slot, and because there is 1 dash here, I get 1 click to adjust the yaw value of my movement. To do the move, I take these teeth at the end, at the 0 mark of the maneuver tool, and I place them into the front of the ship and line them up like so. I then take the ship and I move it along the maneuver tool until I get to where my speed is at and lock it in. In this case, speed 1. And then I remove the tool. That is the bare bones basics of how you move. Now let's get into more specific situations. So, when I'm wanting to perform a maneuver and I decide where I want to go, when I am planning my maneuver, I cannot stick the teeth into the slots on the ship. Once those teeth are set into the ship slot, you are locked into your move and you cannot change it. I repeat, once you lock your teeth into the ship slot, you are locked in and you cannot change your move. However, you can be as close as you can without locking in to get the best idea of where your ship will end up. When you're planning, for example, at speed 1 and I want to turn left, I get one click at the 1 because I have one click at the 1 when I'm at speed 1. And then I would lock in the maneuver. Now this maneuver would be illegal. The reason being, because whenever I go to the teeth here and lock this in, my ship just crossed the maneuver tool, and that is an illegal move. I also cannot jump sides of the ruler. I cannot go from here and then jump to this side of the maneuver tool. That is also considered an illegal move. If I wanted to make this turn, I have not confirmed my move yet, I would have to move to the other side of the ship, lock it in, and then move to the 1 slot. That is a legal move. Now, let's say I'm going speed 2. At speed 2, I get no clicks at the 1 marker. That's what this side dash means. But I still get 1 click at the 2 marker on the maneuver tool. So, while I'm planning, I cannot get a click here. However, I do get a click at the 2. And I want to turn this direction, so I would have the maneuver tool on this side of the ship, because if I put it on this side of the ship, it would be an illegal move, because once I lock it in and I move, I would be crossing the tool, and that would be an illegal move. Instead, I will need to move my tool to the other side of the ship, make sure that it's doing what I want it to do, lock it in and commit, because once you lock it in, you are committed and you have to complete the move. I then move, lock it in, and that is a legal move. Some ships are faster and more maneuverable, like the CR-90 Corvette. For example, at speed 2, the CR-90 gets 1 click at the 1 and 2 clicks at the 2, which means I could do 1 click at the 1, a click at the 2, and another click at the 2 to make an extremely tight turn. Lock it in, commit, and then move to this spot for a legal move. One special thing you can do with small ships, especially, sometimes on medium and large ships if you have the range, is what's called the inside turn. So this right here would be an illegal move, because once I lock it in and I go to the teeth, the ship would be crossing the tool, and that would be illegal. However, if I leave the clicks at the 2 slot straight, but click at the 1, I can then lock it in, move to the 2, and this is a legal move. It's an inside turn because I'm remaining on the inside portion of the tool while not crossing it. And these maneuvers primarily can be done by small ships at high speeds. While you are planning your move, as you experiment with your maneuver tool, you will find that you can do some interesting maneuvers by doing various clicks at various points along the tool. So for example, at speed 3, I get no clicks at the 3, 1 click at the 2, and 2 clicks at the 3. This is what I've initially planned. So first, an illegal version of this move. I lock it in, I move to the 3, however I'm crossing the tool, that is an illegal move. However, if I take this tool and move it to the other side, I commit, I lock it in, I then am basically doing a sidestep up to the 3, allowing me to still move in a straight line, but I'm shifting slightly to perhaps get a better line of sight or firing arc on another ship, or to get out of the way of an obstacle. Since I have 2 clicks at the 3, I could also click like so, lock it in, still maintain my relatively straight movement, but at the end perform a little adjustment, which could also help me realign my arcs for shooting and preparing to move for next turn. As I discussed in the command tokens section of this tutorial, maneuver dials allow you to change your speed and or get an additional click somewhere else on the tool. So for example, I have this as my command, and I choose when I reveal this command that I'm going to use it as the dial. You do not choose whether you're going to use the dial in the maneuver step, you choose it when you reveal the command. I want to upgrade to speed 4. At speed 4, I get no clicks at the 1, 1 click at the 2, 1 click at the 3, and 2 clicks at the 4. And I want to perform the hardest turn this way that I can. So to start, I get 1 click at the 2, 1 click at the 3, 2 clicks at the 4, and because I used a dial, I get another click somewhere along the tool. So I could get a click at the 3, I could get a click at the 2, or I could also get a click at the 1. We'll leave this like so. I lock it in, and then you will see that I cover not only a lot of distance, but perform a pretty serious turn as well. Let's say I want to slow down, do a hard brake so to speak, and do a tight turn. I have a navigate token already on my ship. I reveal a navigate dial. Then in the maneuver step, I slow down to speed 2. I do that because I can change my speed with the dial and combine that with the token to change my speed twice. At speed 2, I get a click at the 1 and 2 clicks at the 2. I then spend my dial using its additional ability of giving me another click at the 2. So in this instance, I have slowed down and performed a very tight turn. I would like to now show you a trick on how to use the maneuver tool that comes with your game, and to use it more effectively when there are multiple things on the board getting in the way. So right now I'm moving at speed 2 with a dial, which means I get extra clicks, and I want to figure out where I want to go. Try to do my planning. This is an illegal move on this side, so I got to switch it to this side, and the ship's just getting in the way. This Victory 2 is getting in the way of me really getting an assessment of what I can do. One option is to use one of these side markers that you use for determining setup during the deployment phase. And you can just remove the ship like so. I'm then free to place my tool, lock it in, and do my move. And then I would release the tool, replace the ship, and that is a legal move, and I did not ram. Another way to do this without having to utilize the marker is instead move your tool farther back. I know I'm going speed 2, so I just adjust the tool down, kind of like moving a decimal place. I start planning my maneuvers at the 2 section, since I have 1, 2 speed movements that I will be moving. So even though this says 2, 3, and 4, I'm converting this for this purpose to 0, 1, and 2. I can then do my turn and maneuvers in my planning, and in this case I'm going to do an inside turn, to avoid ramming the ship. Lock it in and execute my move. I'm still only going speed 2, but I adjusted the maneuver tool so I had more space and could better fine-tune my movement and my planning. I do recommend in the additional supplemental accessories section of my tutorial of getting multiple maneuver tools, breaking them down, and having shorter ones. I'll describe that in more detail in that section. In friendly games, and I would even say in some more competitive games, but mainly in friendly games, you can do what's called eyeballing. As opposed to grabbing a marker for each of these ships and squadrons to move them, and sometimes that is the best method, especially in competitive, but for casual you can do what's called eyeballing. And you can basically, as you're planning, just look, do your planning here, trying to adjust what you want to do. But once you've finalized your move, and I'm looking here, and I'm lining up the teeth as best I can up and down to where the marker would be here. And then I can just pick up the ship because I can clearly see I'm going to clear the victory and do my best to get it to where it lines up again. Again, the angle on the camera, it looks like it's way off, but trust me, as I'm looking at it here top down, this is lining up pretty close. And you can have your opponent help you with like holding this steady, etc. And even though best practice would be to use these markers to mark your ships and squadrons to get them out of the way and then replace them after the movement is done, sometimes there's just so much going on. For example, there could be 7 to 10 squadrons in this ball with 3 or 4 ships. Fast ships like this Corvette can move up to speed 4 and are maneuverable enough they could still pass over it. Sometimes it's just quicker and easier just to eyeball the maneuver and just make sure that your opponent is okay with that. Now let's discuss ramming. You ram a ship if you overlap any portion of that ship, including the shield dials. And you ram a ship where you end your movement, not if you pass through. So in this example, I lock in my move. I'm going speed 4. I made no adjustments. Landing on the 4 slot would cause me to ram. Therefore, I would have to move back to the 3, the closest spot I could land on, lock it in, and then both ships take a damage card, face down. In another example, I'm still going speed 4, and this is where the obstructing ship is. I lock in my speed. I then move to where 4 is and lock it in. And this is clear. Even though I passed over the ship, it does not matter the fact that I passed over it. It matters where I landed to determine if I ram or not. If there are multiple ships in the way, and I'm going to be ramming, I first lock in my move. I go to where I would go, which is speed 4, based on my speed. I would ram here. I then go back to the next slot on the maneuver tool to see if I still ram. I go to the 3. I'm still overlapping, therefore still ramming. I then go back to the 2. Still overlapping, still ramming. I then go back to the 1. This is where I can land and still be okay. I take a damage because I rammed the Nebulon. I did not ram the Victory. You determine the ships that you are ramming based on the closest part on the maneuver tool from where you started. I started at 0, and the closest ram was at this location. I had to come back to the 1, therefore I rammed the Nebulon, not the Victory. And we both take a face-down damage card. Ramming could cause you to perform what would normally be called an illegal move, but in this case is considered legal. My Victory is in this slot right here. I've marked it so that I can plan my maneuver. And if the Victory wasn't there, this would be a legal move, the inside turn. I lock it in, I move up to the 4, I'm still on this, made an inside turn, and this is legal. However, if I replace the victory, we are overlapping and ramming. I then go back to the 3. This would normally still be a legal move. However, I place back the victory, we are still overlapping, therefore I must keep moving back. I then move back to the 2. Normally, this would be an illegal move because I'm overlapping the maneuver tool. However, the exception is here, since I am ramming, I can still place the victory here. It's the first place that I can go on the tool while counting back where I don't ram the victory. And even though I'm crossing the tool, this is still a legal move after the ram, and we both take damage cards. Remember, crossing the tool is only allowed in response to a ram when finding the closest point you can from your original location of where you were going to be. It is normally not legal to cross the maneuver tool, only in the instances of ramming. Now let's talk about overlapping squadrons. If, when I'm planning my move, I lock it in, and I'm going speed 2, so I would land here, I overlap any number of squadrons, the squadrons are removed, I complete my move, you do not ram, because you do not ram squadrons, and your opponent gets to replace the squadrons along your ship, and they must be placed along the side of the ship while not overlapping the ship. And this is a good time to talk about overlapping squadrons. At the very beginning of this tutorial, I talked about the tabs. You ignore these tabs on the squadrons when determining if you're overlapping. So this would not be overlapping. However, this would be, because you do count the shield dials, and the shield dial is overlapping the cardboard. You can get a better view here. This is not an overlap. This is an overlap. And for example, this is an overlap because I'm completely under the ship. And when you are replacing the squadrons, you have to make sure that you are not overlapping when you make the placement. If you have multiple squadrons that you have overlapped, usually happens when big ships hit a big squadron pile, the person who did not move takes all squadrons, regardless who they belong to, and places them around the ship, touching the ship but not overlapping, and then, if there is still not room, continues placing them as close as possible to the other squadrons that are touching the ship. Now let's talk about overlapping obstacles. This is a debris field, and I'm currently overlapping it because my shield dial is overlapping the debris field, and shield dials are counted for the purposes of overlapping. By overlapping the debris field, I take 2 damage, and I can assign that damage anywhere on my ship, either by damage cards or on shields, but they have to be on the same side when I'm taking it on the shields. So I can choose to take it on the 2 shields over here. I cannot separate my damage and take 1 shield and 1 shield, for example. And this would not be an overlap. It's close, but I have cleared the debris field. An asteroid field, if I overlap it, I take a face-up damage card. And the station, if I overlap it, I heal a damage card. Many times as you play Armada, you will find that the board can get awfully cluttered, whether it's lots of ships and or squadrons just in the way, especially when you are trying to maneuver. I want to cover a couple special circumstances when it comes to ramming and landing on obstacles. So, for example, let's say I have this maneuver. I'm going straight, and I'm at speed 4. I lock it in, I move, speed 4, I land, I overlap, go back to 3, I still overlap, I then go back to the 2. The first thing that happens is I take a face-down damage card from my ram. But then I land on the station, which heals my damage card. And this can be a good way if you see that you're going to ram, but you're going to land on the station anyway, you can just take the ram, your opponent takes the damage, and then you are able to immediately heal the damage. However, the opposite is also true. Let's say in this situation. I'm already on this asteroid. I landed there last turn, and I took a face-up damage card. I am now speed 2. This would be a ram. I move to the 2, I'm overlapping. I move to the 1, I'm still overlapping, so I have to go back to the 0. I did not move. I take a damage card from the victory. I then, even though I did not technically move, I still land on the asteroid and take another face-up damage card. And from this maneuver, I end up taking 2 damage. 1 from ramming the victory, and 1 from landing back on the asteroid in a face-up damage card. And I would like to reiterate, in this circumstance, when you lock in your move, you are committed. You cannot take it back. So, you've done all your planning, your adjustments, and you discover that you can't change your speed. There are no other ways to avoid this ram and then landing on the asteroid and taking damage. A very bad situation for you, and it's actually going to destroy your ship. And you've locked yourself in, and then you realize, oh, I'm not going to clear this, I am going to ram. And this, a better example would be if I was at speed 3. Because going speed 3, I'm still overlapping, and you misjudged it when you were doing your planning. So you have to go back, take the damage from the ship, and take the damage from the asteroid field. You can't change your mind once you've locked it in. You have to commit to the move. To reiterate again, after you've done all your planning with your dial and your tool, etc., once you lock in, you are committed. For the good, the bad, and the ugly, you have to commit to the move. You cannot take it back. In this section, we are going to be talking about squadrons. And I'm only going to be going over the basics when it comes to commanding, activating, and attacking, and moving with squadrons. There's a lot more intricacies and advanced play when it comes to squadrons, and that will be covered in a future video. But for now, I will be discussing the basics. First, every squadron has 2 possible actions it can take. It can either move or shoot. And these are primarily decided in the squadron phase. The squadron phase happens after the ship phase. And the ship phase is when all ships have been activated and have completed their actions. You then move to the squadron phase, and squadrons can either shoot or move, not both, in the squadron phase. However, in the ship phase, if a ship had revealed a squadron command and it was within range, you could activate a number of squadrons equal to the squadron value. So for example, the Victory 2 here, if it revealed the squadron dial, it could activate up to 3 squadrons. The CR-90 Corvette, however, could only activate 1 squadron. And if you had a squadron token, you can activate only 1 squadron. When a squadron is activated by a command from a ship, it can shoot and move, or move and shoot, in any combination you wish. Let's go over basic squadron combat. This X-Wing and this TIE Interceptor are facing off against each other, and the Rebel player goes first, and it is turn 1, and turn 1 on your marker will be on the blue side. And in the squadron phase, I choose that I want my X-Wing to attack this TIE Interceptor. First, I must measure the range, and you measure the range to attack on the distance side of your measuring tool, and the range to attack is always at distance 1. Real quick, I know there are many exceptions and many special rules that are on Squadron Cards. We will not be discussing those in this tutorial. Those will be in later videos. So, since the X-Wing is within distance 1, and again, as a reminder, you measure from cardboard to cardboard, it is able to gather its anti-squadron armament, which is listed here as 4 blue dice. And then goes through the normal attack steps that you would normally do with attacking ships, and I refer you back to the combat section of this tutorial to review that. So the X-Wing would gather its dice, roll its dice, make any adjustments to its dice through potential special abilities on cards, and then assign damage to the squadron. And if this were an ace squadron with defense tokens, you would go to the resolve defense token step first, then assign damage. In this attack, the X-Wing has destroyed the TIE Interceptor. Because the TIE Interceptor only has 3 health, you would count it down to 0, and the TIE Interceptor is removed. After the X-Wing has done its attack, you then switch the slider over to the red side. And since this is turn 1, and we are on the blue side of the turn marker, since this is switched to the red side, I now know that this squadron has already activated and cannot activate again, and we'll have to wait until turn 2 when the turn marker is turned to the red side. If instead, as the rebel player, I wanted my X-Wing to move away from the TIE Interceptor, this would not be allowable because we are at what is called engagement range. Engagement range is distance 1. So even if we are barely within distance 1 of each other, remember cardboard to cardboard, I cannot move because I am what is considered engaged or locked down. I can only attack, I cannot move. If, however, we are slightly further away, I would then be able to move my X-Wing squadron. To move my X-Wing squadron, I place the distance marker at the edge of the cardboard, of the furthest point of the cardboard, so like so. I then look at the speed, which is marked here. That means my X-Wing squadron can move up to distance 3. It does not have to move the full distance. It can move at any point along here and stop at any point. And the movement range is 360 degrees. I can set this tool up anywhere I like as I am deciding where to move the X-Wing squadron. When I move, I then move the squadron along the tool and stop where I wish it to, and then activate the slider to show that it has already gone. You must stop at the maximum range to here, like so. Let me move in a better angle for you. What I mean is, I place the tool here on the edge of my squadron. I am moving along the tool. I have to stop before I pass the number 3. This is not a legal move for my X-Wing squadron because it can only move speed 3 and I've crossed the 3 line. I must remain behind the 3 line. Squadrons do not worry about ramming or passing through ships or other squadrons. As long as I have the proper amount of distance and I can move at speed 3, this X-Wing can pass over this victory and land safely on the other side wherever it wishes, as long as it is not overlapping the victory. I cannot move over the victory and stop on top of it, or be in a position, for example, where I start my move, I finish my move, and to remain inside the 3 line, I would be overlapping any part of the ship, even if it's barely. Even if I barely am overlapping this dial, that is an illegal move, and I cannot do it. I will have to stop somewhere else where it is a legal move, or maybe just adjust my angle to line up like so. When squadrons attack ships, you have to determine several factors. And before we continue, I want to discuss what constitutes a hit from a squadron. As a basic rule, exceptions not applying, only hit icons count as hits when attacking ships or squadrons. Only hits also count when receiving attacks from a ship onto a squadron. As the base rule, only hits matter when determining damage against squadrons. It does not matter if you get a crit. Accuracies by squadrons can still be spent normally. So if you want to attack a ship, you must first determine several things. First, if you are engaged with another squadron that is an enemy, you cannot attack the ship. If you are not engaged, you then must be in range, and the range is always distance 1. You then must do all the same things that you do with a ship when determining if you can make an attack. Are you within arc? The arc of a squadron is its entire base 360 degrees. I want to shoot at the front. It is a clear line of sight. And when you're measuring line of sight with squadrons, you measure from the plastic stick in the middle to the yellow dot on the ship. And I am in range. I then go to my anti-ship armament and I roll this red dice. And that would be a hit. Ignore the bomber keyword on the X-Wing squadron for now. If this were a crit, that would not be a hit. Remember, only hits matter for squadrons as the general rule. If my X-Wing were here, and I wanted to attack this whole zone, let me remove this for a better view, I would not be able to make that attack, although it is within range, within my firing arc, but line of sight from the plastic stick to the yellow dot will cross the green line on the victory, and therefore there is no line of sight. If I wanted to attack this TIE Interceptor Squadron, I would still have to measure line of sight, and you measure again from the plastic stick and against squadrons to the opposing plastic stick, and since the straight line would be overlapping this corner, it would be considered obstructed, and I would have to remove one of my 4 blue dice, and I'd only get 3 blue dice for this attack. If my X-Wing were commanded by a ship with a squadron dial and had the option to shoot and move, in this particular instance I could not move because I am engaged. If we were obstructed, we would no longer be considered engaged, and then I could move. If I attack the TIE Interceptor first, because you can shoot or move in any order, and I destroy the interceptor, I would then be free to move, because I can get both of my actions because I was activated by a squadron command from a ship. And if I was activated by a command, I could shoot first at the TIE Interceptor Squadron obstructed, because we are obstructed. Once the attack resolves and the TIE Interceptor is still alive, I could still move, because we are obstructed and therefore not engaged. Squadrons can land on obstacles without any negative effect. They do get the positive effects of the station, however. If my X-Wing was on 4 health, and then I moved him onto the station, he would heal 1 damage. While squadrons are occupying a portion of an obstacle, they are considered obstructed if, when you are drawing your line of sight from center to center, or from center to a yellow dot on a ship, if any part of that line crosses the obstacle, it is considered obstructed. With this shot, if I just do these slight adjustments, even though both squadrons are technically still in their obstacles, drawing a straight line from center to center, I am not crossing the obstacles. Therefore, it is a clear line of sight and not obstructed. And when you are drawing the line of sight, you're using the center to determine the line, but the distance is still from cardboard to cardboard. So even though the plastic stick here is still technically on the station, the cardboard is clear to this cardboard, and therefore a non-obstructed shot. And also these squadrons would be considered engaged currently because it is not obstructed. However, if we were like so, we would be considered not engaged because there is an obstruction between both of our ships. But if I move my squadron slightly forward here, we are now no longer obstructed and considered engaged. When a ship attacks a squadron, it uses its anti-squadron armament printed here on the ship cardboard or printed here on your ship card. In this instance, 1 blue dice. When I am declaring my attacks, remember you get 2 attacks every turn for your ship, and you have to declare from different hull zones. Let's say I declared out of my front hull zone and attacked another ship off screen. I then want to attack these squadrons at the side and do a flak shot. I get to attack every single squadron once that is within arc and within range. And I roll my 1 blue dice because that is my anti-squad armament. And as a reminder, crits do not count when attacking squadrons. Only hits count, and you can assign accuracies if you have multiple anti-squadron dice you are attacking with. You are allowed to use the concentrate fire dial when attacking squadrons, but it only applies to one squadron that you are attacking. So for example, I declare that I want to attack these squadrons out my starboard side. I do my first attack on this squadron. I roll. I get a hit. Squadron takes damage. I then attack the second squadron, Luke Skywalker. I roll. That is a miss. I then choose to use my concentrate fire dial to add a dice. That is still a miss. However, let's say I also had a concentrate fire token, and at the same time when I chose to use the dial, I chose to use the token. I can then re-roll this dice and it gets a hit. I can then spend my accuracy on the brace that Luke Skywalker has on his card. Similar to ships, you can also double arc squadrons. In this example, I want to flak out my front and my side on both of these squadrons, and I can do that because I get 2 attacks every round with my ships. It is from separate hull zones, and my arc line passes through both squadrons. Therefore, I flak out the front, I roll a blue dice, 1 for each squadron. I then go to my second attack out the starboard side, and then roll 1 blue dice again on both squadrons. When activating a squadron with a squadron command during the ship phase, you first must determine if the squadrons are within range, and you measure from cardboard to cardboard. An activation range is close to medium range on the range ruler. So for example, this Nebulon has revealed a squadron command dial. Its squadron value is 2, therefore it can activate up to 2 squadrons. Luke Skywalker and this X-Wing are within its activation range of close to medium, and therefore they can be activated. If, for example, Luke was out here and this X-Wing squadron was here, the Nebulon B could activate this X-Wing squadron, but not Luke Skywalker, for it is out of range. However, if Luke was just barely overlapping the line, cardboard to cardboard, he would be eligible to be activated. When activating a squadron, whether through a squadron command dial in the ship phase, or activating squadrons in the squadron phase, you activate a squadron one at a time and complete the entirety of its activation before moving to the next squadron. For example, I have revealed a squadron command dial. I get to activate up to 2 squadrons. I choose Luke Skywalker. I move him, measuring the distance up to movement 3, and because it's with an activation command or a squadron command, I can then attack this TIE interceptor because I get to do both actions with a squadron command. I complete the attack after the move, and then I slide the activation slider over. I then move on to my next squadron, this X-Wing. I can then also move this X-Wing, perform an attack, and as a reminder, making sure I'm within distance 1 to be in engagement range to do the attack. Once the attack sequence has finished, I then move the activation slider. When activating squadrons in the squadron phase, your opponent and yourself go back and forth choosing 2 squadrons at a time. The first player will choose 2 of their squadrons and go through the full activation sequence. And in the squadron phase, you only get one of your 2 actions, shoot or move, not both. So in this example, as the Rebel player being first player, Luke Skywalker can move or shoot. He's not in range to shoot, so he will move to engage Darth Vader, and then slide his activation slider over. The Rebel player can then choose a second squadron to activate. He'll choose this X-Wing, which will also move to engage Darth Vader. Then the Imperial player gets to activate 2 squadrons. He will activate Darth Vader. Darth Vader cannot move right now because, as I've stated before, when you are engaged, squadrons are locked down, they cannot move. But he can take a shot at either Luke or the other X-Wing because they are both within distance 1. Once the attack sequence ends, the Imperial player can then activate a second squadron, these TIE interceptors, who can also attack Luke or the X-Wing squadron as they are both within distance 1. And then you repeat back and forth until all squadrons on both sides have been activated. If, for example, in the squadron phase, and this also applies when activating squadrons with a command dial, this was turn 1, and your turn marker is on the blue side. These orange tabs show that these squadrons have already been activated, say by previous squadron commands during the ship phase. We are now in the squadron phase, and it is the Rebel player's turn to choose up to 2 squadrons to activate. However, he only has 1 squadron eligible, this X-Wing squad, because its tab is on the blue side. He cannot activate Luke Skywalker because the tab is on the red side, meaning that it is already activated. You cannot activate a squadron that has been previously activated in the same round. The X-Wing will then move in to engage. It will only move because it is currently the squadron phase, and move into engagement. Then it is the Imperial player's turn to pick 2 squadrons to activate. However, the Imperial player does not have any eligible squadrons because they are all on the red tab, and we are currently on a blue facing with the turn marker. And that is why you flip your turn marker from blue to orange and back to blue, because it also indicates whether or not squadrons have activated for that round. As a reminder, you cannot activate a squadron for a second time if it has already been activated in the current round, regardless if it's in the ship phase or the squadron phase. In the final section of this tutorial, I want to give you some of my recommended supplemental accessories to improve the gameplay of Star Wars Armada. The first thing I recommend you buy is a laser pointer, specifically one that has the horizontal line on a flat surface. This will greatly increase your ability to measure line of sight, firing arcs, and other measurements you might need, especially when the game board gets rather cluttered. You can find these at usually any hardware store, and this one in particular I ordered from the Army Painter. I like this one because it's a bit more compact. The second accessory I recommend are card sleeves for all of your cards. This will greatly increase the longevity of your game and protect your cards from accidents like spills, or a lot of times when you're gaming you like to have snacks around and you can get food on your fingers, and that could mess up your cards as well. There have been many instances with other games I play where a couple spills have happened, and my cards were saved because only the plastic was damaged and not the card itself. And these, again, really increase the longevity of your cards. And even outside of Armada, I highly recommend that you sleeve all of your games. That's what I do, and I do not regret it. The next accessory I recommend is just getting more dice. The core game only comes with 3 dice of each color, and that is not nearly enough for playing the game in any effective way. You'll have to remember what you rolled and use the dice you've already rolled to re-roll additional dice, add more dice to the dice pool, etc. So if you have multiple core sets, especially if it's just 2, you might have enough with 6 dice of each color. That could probably get you by. Or if you just have 1 core set, just buy the additional dice packs. I actually have a couple, so I have more than enough dice whenever I roll my large dice pools and sharing amongst friends. The next thing I recommend is getting additional maneuver tools with the maneuver tool packs. Or if you have multiple core sets and you have multiple maneuver tools, break down the Movement 4 maneuver tool into at least a maneuver 2. With a 4 and a 2, that'll greatly increase your ability to plan and execute your maneuvers without getting in the way of the board clutter that can sometimes happen in Armada. However, eventually over time, I personally would recommend getting 1 tool for each movement speed. It has greatly increased my ability to play the game and the enjoyment of the game. Lastly, and this may be further down the line for many of you, but I highly, highly recommend eventually to get yourselves a set of custom range rulers that mark all the different distances. It is so much easier when measuring distance 2 with a distance 2 ruler as opposed to trying to fit the distance 5 ruler in tight spaces trying to find distance 2. The same goes for weapon ranges. As you can see here, and if you have watched my introductory channel to my YouTube page, you've seen this before, but this is a custom set that I ordered from Garrett Vance over at Admiral Tater's ship shop. And I highly recommend, when you are ready to pull the trigger, to start getting more accessories for your game and custom accessories with custom designs and colors to really accentuate your game and improve the gameplay. I highly recommend you go over to Admiral Tater's ship shop and check his site out. I promise you, you won't regret it. Whew! Now that was a journey, wasn't it? I hope you didn't watch this video start to finish, and if you did, kudos to you. Instead, I hope you utilize this as a slow drip, pick your poison in the description below to find out what you needed. As I stated in my opening, if you saw any mistakes, especially egregious mistakes, please post them in the comment below with a timestamp so I can post the correction in the pinned post in the description below. Now moving forward, this series is going to involve more tutorial videos of a much shorter nature, thank goodness, and they will be covering more advanced tactics, basic tactics, and also interesting interactions between cards and ships, etc. And we are going to explore those together, and this will be an ever-evolving series. The next video that I will be releasing is going to be an introductory battle report, so stay tuned for that within the next week or so. I will also be releasing an introductory video on how to play Star Wars Armada on the Tabletop Simulator app on Steam. That has been requested of me by the creator of the app, and I will be putting that together in the next couple weeks as well. And lastly, as a reminder, if you have questions or if you need a verification of something, use the Living Rules reference or go to the Star Wars Armada forums that are run by Krabbuck and ask there. Or you could ask down here, and I will endeavor to answer the question as best as I can. If you would like, please subscribe to my channel so that you can be updated when these new videos drop. And I also hope you check out some of my battle reports, as those are going to be the mainstay of my channel, and are also the most fun ones to video for myself. So until next time, take it easy.